Hello. Hello, everybody. So glad you're here with us.
Hello.
All right. Are you still getting the audio in the background? Okay, one sec.
We're hearing things. Ben.
We're here on our end. Okay. That's weird. Okay. Hey, everybody. Glad you're here with us. And
we've just done this for the first time today. This is our first time kicking off ever. Many people wouldn't know that this is a 5-year conversation that's been going on with live streams. So technology.
Goodness. Oh, so George and I were here, and I couldn't tell if y'all were, but the video's to kick off when we come on, and that didn't do that. So, hey, everybody, glad you're here with us. Looking forward to the session today. George and I are excited to talk about learning and supporting our people and helping them grow and be and do their best work. It's going to be incredible. George, I'm glad you're here with me, my friends, and looking forward to this. We have some really good things planned. So let's get into some of the quick housekeeping things, because we've got a great set of sessions coming along and want to make sure everybody enjoys this. So if you find the stream and you had not signed up, you just clicked in today and overlooked my fun little issue with the audio there at the beginning, you can sign up for this, get your credits, get all that good stuff at the link here at the bottom of the screen. You can go and do that, and you can come right back to us. That way you're eligible for prizes, all the other good stuff. So we'll be giving that away as we go. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in and share a couple of things. So we're so pumped to be here for this. It's going to be a great session. We have a great set of sponsors and partners working with us on the event. You'll be hearing from some of them today as we go through. And we're really thrilled to talk about how we can help our people excel at work. That's really the key of this today, is to talk through some of those things, give you some data, some stories, some research and evidence on that, and make it all practical. So a couple of quick things. Number one, if you've never been on a live stream with us before, welcome. We're so glad you're here. If you are back. Welcome to that warm embrace that we've got for you. So one of the things that we do is we do a ton of giveaways. So if you're chiming in, you're staying engaged, talk about your experiences, ask questions, share comments on the speaker's thoughts, things like that. Stay engaged. At the end, we have a section of the agenda set aside just to give things away. So we'll be doing that towards the end. So stay chimed in, stay plugged in throughout the event. We'll have HRCI and SHRM credits we'll be sharing out after the event. So stay tuned for those as well. And then if you have issues, we prefer you to join LinkedIn, but sometimes that has hiccups, that has challenges, even for us. And so if you have to, you can jump to the link for Facebook or YouTube. We'll make sure and drop that in the notes here, the comments. You should have that in your email as well if you joined from the link there, but just to make sure everybody has those, we'll get that to you. And that's sort of what we're about today. So here is what we're going to cover for our time together. So we're going to kick off with our keynote panel. Great conversation with Ben Seeke and Terry Lewis about what they're thinking about, what they're prioritizing as people leaders on the learning and the HR side. Kind of a fun dual conversation there. Then we'll get into a couple different conversations with Glider AI, BetterWorks, Cornerstone on different aspects of understanding our people, knowing what their skills are about, developing them to be their best. And at the end today, George and I will go through and share some of the research we've been gathering around this to help you see how leaders like you are thinking about this, what they're prioritizing, what their biggest challenges are when it comes to learning, as well as we'll look at some of the data on the workforce side, how they're thinking about this, what their struggles are when it comes to development, how they feel about work, and how things like whether they get the right amount of training or not affect their intent to stay in their job. You can probably guess what that's going to mean, but we'll hold on the actual stats on that for a little bit. So at the end of the day, we'll give you some data, some stats, make that relevant for all of you. So you walk out of here with some good stories, some good ideas, some good ways of putting this into practice with all of your people. Because when push comes to shove, if we asked you point blank, all of us want to take care of the workforce we're trying to serve. And it's our job to help you do that with some of the research we pulled together. All right. So, and thank goodness for George. He's over here like sharing the comments. As you see, we'd love for you to chime in, whether you're watching us on YouTube, you're watching us on Facebook, you're watching us on LinkedIn. Chime in. We'll make you part of the conversation today as we go through this, because this is about supporting the community, making you part of this bigger conversation. We don't want to talk just at you the whole time. We want to talk with you, and just like a friend would. So, George, I've talked at them for a little bit, and sort of at you too. Anything else that I haven't shared, or anything that you're looking forward to, especially today when it comes to this, or sharing some of the research? I know we've been going over some of the things behind the scenes. What are your thoughts on that?
I think I'm always excited. I love these live streams. I love the interaction. A lot of our HR Summer School alumni here in the chat already, chatting it up and commenting. For those who are new and have never experienced a live stream that we put on, you'll see it in the comments. If you haven't already noticed, the comments will go fast. And so I would like to encourage people, don't try to get stuck on one thing. You'll get lost in the midst of the shuffle, but there's such a great opportunity of connecting. And it's truly our heart really to connect, inspire, and educate through these live streams. And so I'm excited as always to see the chat flowing. As always, when we're introducing our speakers, make sure you like and love and let the hearts and the likes flow on your screens. That does us wonders. That let us know, one, that you are there and you're interacting with us as well. And so we're excited. I'm excited. Great sponsors today. So I want to thank the sponsors as well that are here with us with Atana, Glider, and BetterWorks. I'm so excited about that. But I'm excited about this research. There's a lot of great things that we're going to share. We're going to talk data. Come on. Everybody knows how Principal Ben feels about the data. So we're going to talk a lot of research on this learner. And there's a lot of things that really have been intriguing me. At the end, we're going to talk a little bit about that, especially in the DEI space, the untouchable things that, we're touching, but some of us are pushing away. That conversation is intriguing to me as well.
Okay. All right. Okay, let's dive into this. So we've got our first conversation. We're going to hear from Ben Seeke, from Terry Lewis. Terry is a people executive. Ben is a learning executive. And so we're going to talk about some of the ways they are thinking about this, some of the ways they're approaching. And again, as we said, share, chime in, be active in the chat. Let us know what you think about their comments. I'll make sure and tag them both so you can connect right with them over here on LinkedIn. And we'll dive into this. Here we go. Welcome to the session today. And we're so glad you're here with us. We've been planning this, putting together a lot of great conversations and content for this event. And we're going to kick this off with a great panel with two amazing leaders that I'm so excited to talk to, learn from, and hopefully draw some insights, inspiration for all of you out there. I have Terry Lewis here with me, as well as Ben Seeke, and we're going to be talking about things like how to get the most from your people, how to develop and grow them, how to make sure we're supporting and serving them from our capacities as well as HR and learning, the two sort of personas we have here represented by Terry and Ben. So welcome to both of you. Glad you're here.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for having us.
All right. So before we get some of that fun stuff, we're going to do some quick intros. So Terry, would you go first and tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do, please?
Sure, happy to. Thank you. Terry Lewis. I am the Chief People Officer at a company called One Call. We're in the workers' compensation space. I live in Northeast Florida. I have been in the HR space for over 25 years now and call myself a master of all trades, or a jack of all trades, but a master of none, as that saying goes. I've been mostly a generalist for 25 years, but I think one thing that I did that has helped create who I am as a leader is every time I had an opportunity to fill in for a leader, literally back to my days in manufacturing in the mid to late 90s that was going on leave or a lengthy vacation, I'd do so. I ran a warehouse, I ran shipping and receiving, I ran a sales team for a little bit of time. I swapped jobs with the person doing the HR back office when I was really the front office of HR, and I tried to continue that theme throughout my career to stay close to and understand how the business runs, not just how HR runs. And probably most recent experience doing it for almost 9 months, I ran a global sales and operations team in a mid-market account. I got fired by a client. I found a new client and got him to sign a contract. And I really try and tell everybody in this space to never forget that it really is all about the business and helping make the business run.
I love that one. I was talking to a leader last week, and he said his biggest sort of mission is to get talent acquisition was his field, but get that seen as a business process that you have a TA leader running in the business, but it's a business process at the end of the day. It is not something separate, siloed, off on its own island, but it's there to enable all the other good things like you were talking about there.
Exactly.
Well, glad you're here. All right. Ben, what's your story? Tell us who you are and what you do.
My story, and how long do we have, Ben? But my story in a nutshell.
Ready to go.
My story in a nutshell. So I'm Ben Seeke. I'm the Director of Talent Development and Learning and Head of Learning at Delta Dental. We're the world's largest private dental insurer. So we insure almost 40 million American smiles, which is corny but true. In my role over learning, I oversee a whole bunch of learning activities across the organization. So that ranges from my team's responsible for onboarding our frontline staff in areas like our contact center, our claims examiners, the folks that really run the business, all the way to leadership and executive development, owning our executive education programs, executive coaching, things like that. And then programs, processes, and platforms that support a culture of learning across the organization. So our development planning processes, our learning systems, all that kind of stuff. I got into this work 12 or 13 years ago. I'm just fascinated by, as I know we all are, how organizations are really just a group of people working together towards a common cause. And this idea that whether it's through learning and development, whether it's through general leadership, whether it's through other areas of HR, we're just trying to help folks be focused on the right things, work well together. I love work that that's focused on building skills in employees, right? And so that's been really my career arc. I had the opportunity before joining Delta Dental to spend time at Guitar Center, at MUFG Union Bank, and at Weight Watchers, where I spent the first few years of my career as a trainer.
That is fun. If anyone is curious, by the way, you can go back and watch some more previous conversations or check out the podcast, because I've talked to Ben in the past about some of his stories, and we've had some great takeaways and lessons learned. And so I was excited to have him come back here, join me and Terry, and talk about some of the big things here. As we're releasing some of our research later today at the event, we're also talking with different leaders about some of the things that we're seeing in that data and trying to get some inputs from them as well. So I'm excited to hear from both of you on some of that as we go through the next little bit. So I'm going to start off with our first question. So Terry, I'm going to let you take this one and start us off. One of the things in our research that we've seen that honestly is concerning to me is that when we ask employees, what's the number one reason that you're taking training at work? It's not because they're trying to grow. It's not because they have a career vision. It's not because some of those things that we're excited about. It's because someone made them do it. It's mandatory. It's required. And I'd love to hear from you. Any thoughts on what we can do as HR leaders to try to change and adapt that and try to create a culture where people are learning because they really want to, not because someone's making them do it?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I really like this topic, and I think it's important to think about, right? We all realize that there is always going to be required compliance training. It's not going away. We have risks in the world. They're only getting larger. We're going to have cybersecurity. We're going to have sexual harassment. We're going to have fill in the blank training forever. Okay. Well, let's put that to the side, right? I think you have to set that aside, and I think you have to get people aligned around what's needed to enable their work today, but also their work for the future. And that's cultural. That's more than just one person. That's organizational. And you have to shift mindsets from one that thinks of mandatory training on the regular to one that thinks of training being intrinsic in what they do every day. And how do you do that? Well, it's not going to be exactly the same for everybody, but as I was thinking through this question, I focused on 5 or 6 key areas that I think are common that we can all align around. So first, you have to have leadership buy-in and commitment. Your leaders have to be on board with this. The visible support of your leaders to help people make the time to do this pays dividends in the organization. And that visible support will also help create what I think of as number 2, which is creating then a culture of continuous learning. Formal learning, informal learning, you need it all, from a brown bag lunch to a formal training in a training center with an instructor in front of the room. You need it embedded everywhere. You also, my third item here is you need to make your training engaging. You need to make it relevant. You need to embed it into the work environment. No one wants to listen to a talking head all day. We've all had the boring stuff, right? You have to research adult learning modalities, adult learning methodologies. You have to incorporate real case studies. It has to be relevant to what you're doing. You have to make it easy, right? I think number 4, you have to call it out. You have to recognize people. You have to reward them for doing this stuff. You have to publicly acknowledge that it's expected and that it helps you grow your career and help the organization succeed. 5th, you have to make sure that you're aligning that training with individual goals and career paths. So you talked earlier in the question about people don't see it that way. You have to make it obvious. There has to be a career path that embeds it along the way, and that you then reward and recognize stuff I've already talked about, the people that are growing and developing, by helping them with their career pathing and advertising that and rewarding it. And then finally, you have to make it accessible and you have to be flexible. You have to offer a variety of learning formats, online, micro learning, in-person workshops. I love it when it's embedded in the system that you're using as things are changing. And you have to figure out, and it's not always possible, but how can employees access training materials on their own time and on their own devices? So those are some key areas that I think about when I think about that question and ways to make this better than just your standard compliance training.
I think Ben's going to get a crick in his neck from like cheering over there. I didn't see a
Right,
fist
I
pump,
mean-
but it was close, I think.
Look, we should bottle this and send it to organizations across the country, Terry, right? Because 1,000%, I loved, you called out creating time and space for it. One of the biggest obstacles we have is there, and you called out culture change, this idea that the compliance training, that's required, and this other stuff is extra. We'd like to do it if we have time. It's nice if we do it, but really shifting it to, it's an organizational imperative, just like so many other parts of our work, and it requires dedication, it requires intention, it requires time and resources. So very well said.
Thank you. And I guess one other point that I'd probably add in is it has to be for everybody, right? Don't focus on one job. Don't focus on one function. I think it's important that your culture of learning applies to everybody that works for your organization.
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the other questions we actually saw in the data. We said, how is learning positioned in your business? Is it for leaders only? Is it for high performers only? Is it just for the new joiners, or is it for everyone? And you see different pockets of employees responding differently about that. We obviously want them to see it this is for everybody. The accessibility piece you mentioned, Terry, like this ties in for all of us. And I'm not limited from that because I was 1 point shy of my performance eval, or I've been here for long enough that I'm off the track and I took the training wheels off and good luck, sucker. No, there's so much more that I can learn and can continue to long term. So I love the position there that you put those pieces together.
A big part of the value that HR in general and the learning function adds is advocating for those employees that can sometimes get overlooked in these things. Leaders, and I mean, all of us are like this. We have a bias towards the people, the parts of the organizations that we interact with all the time, right? I've seen this in many organizations where executives will often be very focused on executive development. Why? They're executives, they're interacting with executives, they're very happy to sponsor leadership development. And it's not that they're uninterested in sponsoring learning for other groups, it's that not all those other groups are always very visible to them. And that's where we have a good opportunity to advocate and remind folks, like, our entire organization needs to be learning and growing, right?
Absolutely.
Today's new hire could be tomorrow's future leader, right? They could grow with us for 5, 10, 20 years. We have an important voice in that conversation.
Excellent. Okay, so there's our casting a vision, and if for all of you out there, if I didn't get you fired up yet, then I'm sure we will, and some of these future questions. But that one got me all pumped because we have some good, solid things already to hook into practically to start thinking about how to make this go. So Ben, I'm going to toss this next question to you. One of the conversations on LinkedIn on a regular basis, we're streaming on LinkedIn right now. Hi, everybody. And one of the things that you see in almost every conversation that's happening out there, some flavor of it, is the importance of skills, whether it's we've got to acquire skills, we've got to develop skills, we've got to have a skills intelligence, skills mapping, skills analytic, like all the different things. Let's put skills with some other word and make it go. What is your thoughts on this? Is this a new thing? Is this a repackaged thing? Is this something, another fad passing us by? What's your thought on that? I'm giving you free reign here with whatever you want to share.
It's a great question. So, and you asked a bunch of questions in there. So,
I
right.
certainly did, which is terrible. But go for it.
No, they're great questions, right? And there's a lot that goes into this. So one of the questions in there, are they new? They're not new, right? We've been talking about KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities for a long time. They certainly are the hottest topic in the learning space right now. They're the hottest topic in the talent space right now. Across HR, people are talking about skills. And I think they're very important. Like so many other things, the hottest topic today doesn't necessarily replace the things we were talking about before, and it doesn't take away from how important skills were in the past, how important they are now, how important they are in the future. I'm thankful that we're focusing on skills, probably for reasons that are obvious to a lot of folks on this call, but I'll call them out. From a talent management standpoint, it's important to be able to look beyond simply what is this person's job. We all have skills and we all have experiences and things in our background that go beyond what my title is. So if you're trying to figure out, in my organization, we're trying to stand up this new business unit, or we're undertaking this project that requires this certain set of skills, it's important for organizations to have visibility into who has those things beyond just, oh, I figure Terry probably knows this because this is her title. I feel like Ben's been doing this job for a while. Here's what we know about him. From a learning standpoint, there's an opportunity when you're doing skills-based learning to break down the learning into smaller pieces than you would if you were just doing learning on a role basis. I once heard someone say, and comment this if it was you who said this, I'm certainly stealing someone else's quote, that skills are the currency of learning. And they are, right? If you're learning a job, what's that job? It's knowledge, skills, and abilities. It's all these pieces. What's cool about looking at learning, if you're a learning professional, if you're responsible for learning, looking at learning through the lens of skills, is skills touch many different roles, and skills are smaller. And that, I don't say smaller like they're less work, but you can build a program around building a certain skill that is often quicker to build. It's often more widely useful across an organization because many people may have those skills. And what's also cool about skills is because skills are often so transferable. I said the word build, however you get your learning content and programs, right? Whether it is, Terry was talking earlier about formal learning. If you're building programs, if you're sourcing things through vendors, if you're doing social or experiential learning, right? With stretch assignments, partnering with folks that know this stuff, you have a lot of flexibility on how people gain skills because they can learn those through things that might not be directly applicable to their job as a whole, but the way they use that skill is applicable to their job, if that makes sense. So I'm a big fan of skills, even though it's not new. I buy into the hype. I've heard people say, oh, it was competencies in the past, it's skills now. I don't know, the competencies have gone away. Part of what I enjoy about our work, what's also challenging about it, is it's complex. There's a lot of things for us to think through as we look at our workforce and how we develop them.
I couldn't agree more. And I love the point about it. It was competencies before, it's skills today. I think it's both all the time. And I think it's how you define them. And one thing about the focus on skills is, I think if you get it right, it really is applicable across an entire workforce. And in many companies, I think you get feedback that the entry level folks or the more junior employees feel left out in some of this. But really, they should be the area that is most focused on when you look at skill building, because how much more clear and clean can a career path be if you can really break it down into those skills and you can help show them the pathway to learn them over 6 months, 9 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, that lead to opportunities either in a technical career path or a leadership career path, all through going through a process of building skills. So I think that language is very relevant, but then I also say you'd have to layer on the competency pieces, because for me, the way I think about competencies has more to do with the soft skills that you have to build as you continue along in your career.
Right. How you do the work, not just what you're doing.
How you get it done matters a lot, especially the higher you climb on the leadership ladder. Technically, it should matter more because you're interacting and more visible and all those kinds of things. The other part in that sometimes is a little confounding when I'm talking to someone about this, when they're going gung ho on the skills conversation, is they treat it like it's a yes, no, binary sort of thing. And we all know that skills are like basic, intermediate, like there's levels of that, whatever scale you want to use. It's not just, yes, Ben has this skill, or no, he does not, but to what degree does he have that skill? Can he apply that at work? Can he teach others how to build that skill themselves? What mastery level does he have? Because that's a part of this other piece. Again, that goes back to what you said, Ben, where this is simple at one level and deeply complex as well. You can go as deep as you want to go to get into that.
I think, to your point, I totally agree about the nuance of it's not does Ben have the skill, but to what extent and what experiences have they had with that. I think that nuance exists at an organizational level when you're talking about how you manage skills, right? We were having this conversation within my organization, recognizing that on the one hand, if you look at like peak maturity, right, the archetypal skills-based organization where you've got this big taxonomy, you've got the complete skills inventory, and you've got workflows and AI that like looks at people's skills and recommends learning and gives them a career path and does all that kind of stuff, that can feel daunting. Whereas, and don't get me wrong, it's a great vision, and there's a lot of organizations that are moving down that maturity journey. There's a first step and earlier steps that we get to take that are just around identifying critical roles and skills in our organization, getting a sense of, do we need to have the full taxonomy of 1,000 or more skills that different people might have? Maybe, and maybe eventually. But for folks that are earlier in that journey, right? I'm just thinking about all the folks that are watching us on LinkedIn right now. If you're thinking, where do we start with skills? It's about understanding what skills are critical in your organization and who's got those skills and who do you want to have more of those skills.
Terry, we've talked about some of these big picture things, some of your vision around what it takes to change the culture of learning, to those pieces of this. I'd love to hear from you. What are you doing at One Call trying to help grow the capabilities of your people? What are some of the things that you put in place, the ways that you're helping down to the individual levels of your people, helping them be more valuable tomorrow at their work than they were yesterday through learning and skill growth?
So I typically start with the language of data, and that data comes from so many different sources, everything from my new hire surveys about 45, 60 days after they start with us, my exit interview data. I look at our engagement survey data, our pulse survey data, and regular conversations. I join every new hire orientation class and hear questions and what those folks are interested in learning more about. And we look at performance review time period, at mid-year review time period, who's doing what, KPIs, everyone has them all over the organization. So try to root this in data to say, where are our specific gaps for today? What do those gaps look like? And how do we fill them? Soft skills, hard skills, all of it. And when you identify those specific learning gaps, you can find content and bring that content to people that they need and that mostly they're asking for. That then, my hope is, will create interest and result in higher adoption rates of the things that you're teaching. Because people are putting it together with, this is, why they're giving this to me. This is why I need it. It's not just compliance. It's about things that are happening in my job, in the company, that I need to learn to continue to grow and develop. And it also then ensures that we're focusing on things that support the needs of the workforce and the strategy of the organization. So if you do it right, you're able to prepare people for the future by showing them a skill, giving them time to practice a skill, using the skill in the real work scenario, and then looking back on the skill to make sure it was mastered. And that's a development cycle for people, and it helps them move from point A to point B to point C and master a skill. And providing the time and resources to do that can be difficult, but ultimately you're creating a stronger colleague, you're creating a stronger organization, and you're hopefully future-proofing your organization with a pipeline to continue to pull forward for success. So for me, it is about rooting it in the data. It is about meeting people where they are. It is about teaching the skills for today and balancing that with the skills that are needed for tomorrow.
I love that.
Every time Terry finishes, I just want to like applaud a little bit. This is not the format for it, but I want to do that. Ben, anything you want to comment on there?
I mean, it's great stuff, right? Like, totally agree on the listening strategy is important, right? Because I think we were talking about this at the beginning of this call, that we serve an important purpose in advancing the business, right? So there have to be business outcomes that our programs and efforts tie back to, where we can demonstrate impact on that. But we also play an important role in engagement and workplace culture, right? And so to your point, Terry, I love, right, we're looking at new hire surveys. Like I read all the comments related to growth and learning in our pulse surveys that come through, because we want to make sure that we're not just aligning back to what are the strategic needs of the enterprise, which obviously are critical. That's what we're here to deliver, but we're also listening to what individual people are telling us and looking for trends in that data. I think, to your point as well, really well made around the importance of connecting learning to strategy and challenging people to think about where we're going. Learning, as we know, is a process that takes place over time. And certainly we add value when we invest in people to close the current skill gaps that they have that might prevent them from doing their current job or excelling in their current role. But where we add the most value is in preparing the organization and the people in it for the future. So being able to answer that question for ourselves and for our people, where's the company going? What does that mean in terms of the skills that people need to have, the roles that we're going to have tomorrow, and getting out in front of that. And I think that's one of the big shifts that, again, we as HR and learning professionals can help our organization's leaders make around the seeds that we plant today with our talent. If we're doing this right, sprout when we need them to sprout in the future, rather than trying to chase, let's get these people to where we already needed them to be.
And it's a constant planning balance, right? Training for today, teaching people for today while balancing for tomorrow before you need it in some cases, when you need it in some cases. So it really is a perpetual strategic planning cycle when it comes to preparation of your workforce.
Yeah, the book Upstream, I quote it quite often, but they're like, we often are rewarded in any function, not just HR and learning, but any function, you're rewarded for putting out fires. But for all the fires you prevented, there's no fanfare, there's no applause, there's no celebration. But to your point, to both of you, as you're sharing this, you're thinking like, oh, we identified the skills gap. It's costing us X in revenue. We've got to close this on the sales team to get us back up where we need to be. Oh, good job. Celebrate.
It could be a whole other live stream, right? You create the hero mentality, and when you stop rewarding the hero mentality, you get people like we could do a whole nother hour on it.
Well, I was going to say though, but the other piece of that is, if you are planning in advance, you are working towards that. You identify something from a survey. Hey, we're not confident in this new direction of the product. Help us get up to speed on that. And you do that without anyone realizing there was an impact to the revenue negatively before. Like, there's no celebration, even though both of those are laudable, wonderful accomplishments that are meeting the goals you're both talking about, moving the organization forward and enabling every single individual you touch with this learning to be their best and do their best work. So that's the part that I think about when we talk about those pieces, developing for today and for tomorrow, because you never know when tomorrow is going to be like, hey, I'm here, I'm knocking at the door, ready for, hopefully you got people ready for whatever they need to be, because it's time to reform. So
I think that to me is why it's so important, that we have good measurement practices in place, that we're really keeping track of what's the impact we have as a function, how our program's performing, and that's aligned back to real business outcomes, and that we own the narrative and tell our story about that, because people might not come and applaud you for the fires that never started, but you can certainly tell the story of, right, remember how a couple of years ago we were here and we were saying we need to be here. We're here, right? we should be the ones, and not just in a self-serving, self-aggrandizing way, but one that gives credit to our teams. And the selfish part of that is making sure we continue to get our work sponsored and funded when we are having an impact, right? That's the danger of
Absolutely.
doing so well that people don't realize how well you're doing.
Yes, as Terry said, this could be a whole other hour just for this portion of it. So one of the things that's top of mind for me, I'm actually going, a friend of mine is an HR leader at the #1 mid-sized company to work for in the entire US. And that's pretty cool. They're based here in Huntsville. And so she had asked me, they do their regular, I think Terry used the term like brown bag lunch, doing the lunch and learn sort of things. They're bringing me to talk to them about career development and the importance of that. And one of the things they're trying to get across is that, hey, we can do all this stuff on the company side, but we can't own Terry's career. We can't own Ben's career. We can't take ownership of that because you've got to be driving that car. You've got to be piloting that ship, whatever metaphor we want to use there. So Ben, I want to throw this to you to start us off. How do we help employees have some of that sense of ownership when it comes to this? Because we're talking about this from our side, all the things you put in place, all the enablements, all the telling these stories, but we've got to help them feel some responsibility for this growth, or they're never going to take it up. That's my take. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't disagree. We use a metaphor here around the three-legged stool, which is, it would be so nice in life and in business if there was just a single owner of everything, right? There isn't, right? And the three legs of the stool, and for anyone that's not familiar with that metaphor, right? A three-legged stool needs all three legs in order to stand up, right? You take a leg away and it falls down. The three legs are the organization, right? The organization needs to provide resources, including time, including money, job frameworks, right? The sorts of things that support employee development. And of course, opportunities for people to be mobile and for people to learn skills. People's leaders, right? My leader has a critical role in supporting my development. And then to your point, Ben, so do I, right? I would hate to feel like someone besides me was in the driver's seat of my career. I have to be in the front seat of the car, right? Who knows better than me what my goals are, what I'm good at, where I see myself in a few years. But if I don't have, if I take any one of those legs away, something goes wrong. If I'm not in the conversation, how would the organization know what might be a good fit for me? They might know that from looking at my resume, but they're not going to know that in terms of where I want to go, what I'm passionate about, what I'm interested in, when I'm going to retire, any of those kinds of things. If my leader's not engaged in that, I need them to help open doors and to create capacity for me, right? If you want to put me on a stretch assignment so I can go learn this or that or the other, I need my boss's blessing. I need my boss's support. My boss might even be the one that recommends that. And then again, right, the organization, the culture, the environment, and the resourcing. So yeah, and I think talking about it that way so that everyone understands that this is a team sport. It's not they own it. You don't want to be in a standoff. Do you own it? Do I own it? The answer is yes. We all own it.
Yeah, I think that there are folks that will say to me, I know this, that there are folks that will say to me, well, my manager never did my performance review. My manager doesn't do my mid-year review. I don't get that kind of feedback. I've never had a career development conversation. Well, the first thing I always say is, did you ask for one? Okay, when that time of year is, we send emails, we put it on the intranet, you get pinged from the system to do your self-assessment. Did you ask? If your manager's not doing it, did you ask? And if you're not, please do. And if you're afraid to ask, there's a reason. So let's talk about that. Let's get your leader's leader or your HR business partner involved. And that's the conversation that probably happens most often from the individual contributor side that I'd help people through. But then from the leader side, it takes too much time. Why am I doing this? It's administrative. It's not useful. And there's a way to have that conversation too, which is fine. You're not doing this for me. Let's talk about your team. This is not about Terry. This is not about, I'm here to facilitate a process. This isn't about HR stuff. This is about making sure that your team knows how they're doing, knows what they need to do to succeed and make you look good. If that helps, is that what motivates you? If your team is better equipped to do their job better, if they're getting feedback, if they're growing from it, improving from it, you're going to do a better job as their leader. Your numbers are going to be better. Your output is going to be better, right? You're not doing it for me. You're doing it for your succession plan. You're doing it so you can go to another job and have a replacement. You're doing it so if someone leaves your team, you have replacements. And you really have to take it down to the what's in it for me at whatever level that the pushback comes from in these things, in my opinion.
I love that.
Agreed, Terry. When we think about how often it is that people leave an organization because they feel like they don't have the opportunities there, I always make that point to leaders. Would you rather take the time to be having the career conversations with the folks that you have now that you've already invested in and support their development, or spend that time interviewing for their replacement because they went somewhere else to find the opportunity that maybe they could have gotten here?
Well, and Ben, every manager's worst moment, someone resigns, they say, why? I had plans for you. The person says, well, you didn't include me in those plans. I made them for myself. It happens every day.
If we don't help them see that vision that we have for them, that when the recruiter calls in the competition, there's nothing to compete in their head. Sure, they're painting for them. So that's on us. I love the way you put that, Ben. You're choosing your heart. You're going to have that conversation now or with somebody else, but you're going to choose it. One of the things I'll throw out there really quickly, we have actually asked employees in the past about who owns your career development. We give them a chance to sort of weigh in on those different parties. We talk about executive leadership, their manager, HR and training as a group, or themselves. And what's interesting is 2 out of 3 workers. You think of all of you out there listening, think of 2 or 3 of your employees right now, picture 3 of them. 2 out of 3 of them have quit a job at some point in their career because of a lack of growth. What's wild is when we look at those, we look at those people as a cohort in the data. Once you have done that, they place a higher burden on leadership, on HR, on their manager, and on themselves compared to the other group that hasn't done that yet, because they don't do it for fun. They do it because they feel like they have no other option, no other choice.
In this age of LinkedIn and Indeed, we have to remind ourselves that it's so easy. Like back to the, I had a plan for you and why didn't you tell me about it? It's so easy for any of us to go out there and see what's available to us in the outside world, which is why organizations and the leaders in them, the onus is on us to be very explicit with people about the kinds of opportunities that we have here and how we can invest in you. Because if I'm not seeing it here, I can search, I can take 30 seconds and search on LinkedIn and find a whole bunch of places that superficially at least will seem to offer that to me.
Absolutely can. And I think continual leadership, continual growth, continual mentoring and development of your people is also important, because you turn one button on a bad day and 3 months later you may find that job that takes you away. It is an active, vibrant, live, evolving world all the time, and so many different places to go find opportunities to look for. And it might not be today or tomorrow, but you put it out there, it's going to come back to you at some point.
Tremendous. Okay, so both of you have been very forthcoming with strategies, with ideas and suggestions for all of our friends out there. If you walk away from the session without takeaways, you were not listening. I'll go ahead and throw that. I'll go ahead and put the onus back on all the audience out there. There were some good things here. So if the audience here wants to connect, wants to follow you, wants to learn more about the work that you're doing, Ben, what's the best way for them to do that for you?
LinkedIn is the best way. I believe, I'll have to double check this, the only Ben Siki in the world. So if you go on LinkedIn and search for Ben Siki, that should be me.
Okay.
I'm LinkedIn also. I am not the only Terry Lewis in the world. I can.
But you're the best one.
Definitely. I'm the only one that works at One Call though. So if you put in those 4 words in the search line.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again to both of you for being willing to share, for your encouragement, for the insight here. Some amazing takeaways for me. I'm over taking notes myself as we're going through this, because I think there's so much here to share with our leaders. And I love the range of the conversation, honestly, from the big picture. We've got to be on the same page to the very specific. We're developing these skills for today versus tomorrow and thinking through some of those kinds of things. So thank you again to both of you for joining us. To everybody else out there, stay tuned for more good stuff for the rest of the live stream coming right up. Excellent. Good stuff. So love hearing from Terry, from Ben there, some great insights for us around developing our people, thinking about skills at a big picture, thinking about growing them all throughout. I know, like they mentioned culture a little bit there, George, and leadership a little bit there, which I know your love language is. What stood out to you? Yeah, so you're doing your own virtual applause. What stood out to you for that one?
Spirit fingers, when I think about, the culture and the leadership aspect of it, and a lot of comments in the chat kind of resemble this thing that, what happens if leadership doesn't buy in? And unfortunately, the sad part is that when it comes to creating this leadership culture, this learning culture, you got to have buy-in. What we don't embody as leaders is going to be difficult for our employees to really live out. And so it goes back to what I always say: we must inspect what we expect. If we're expecting people to grow, develop, and be invested in our business, what are we doing to grow, develop, and invest in our people? Versus always running a business for profit, creating a business and a leadership culture where we're growing people, right? Instead, I think you shared it and several other people did. Steve Jobs has the famous quote when he was asked about the growth and development of Apple when he came back the second time, and it was, why are we investing in these people and they may leave? Well, the downside is if we don't invest with these people and they stay,
yes,
then what are we doing? So inspect what you expect. If you're expecting growth and development, what are you putting in? What are you empowering? How are you developing your people? And so what if they leave? As leadership, for me, when I think about leadership, Ben, I think about how can I influence, grow, love, show grace, and trust to the person that I have, whether it's for 3 weeks or whether it's for 3 years or 3 centuries. I hope that's not the case, but if somebody stays around for that long, so be it. Our job as leadership is to create the very thing that we desire to see. And a lot of that has to deal with cross-skilling, reskilling, upskilling, or just developing skills in general.
Yes, 100%. Well, I flagged this comment here. I can't tell who it is to give you a shout out. LinkedIn's privacy settings on your profile are set, so I can't see who you are. But this comment someone made ties into this so well. They said, if you don't feel like you're appreciated or valued, you kind of like separate yourself emotionally from your employer. And we'll share us a little bit of that data later on today. One of the things that you see is if someone has not talked with their direct leader about their skills in the last year, they're twice as likely to say, I'm not sure what my future is here at this company, at this organization. So that's absolutely true. Whoever gave you a shout out if I knew your name, but I'll have to go see if I can pick that for the next break we have. So some good takeaways there, good call outs. Great job, Terry and Ben. So next up, we have Satish Kumar with us from Glider. One of the things that Glider AI does is they help employers that are trying to quantify skills, both pre-hire, which is less of the focus today than the development side. But how do we know that George has XYZ skill? How do we prove that? How do we test that? How do we do that without being biased, without influencing that negatively? How do we prove that? And so we'll hear from Satish some of the value of really having a clear vision of skills, understanding how that fits in, and some of the things they're doing to help companies solve for that in a really creative sort of way with the technology. So here we go. Hey everyone, welcome to another session here at the live stream. I know you've been taking some good notes, learned some good things, and I'm excited for this session because you're going to continue that trend. We're going to get some good takeaways here from Satish over at Glider AI, hear how they're working to help employers really validate, understand skills at a tangible level, not just talking about it, but really doing it in a powerful way. So Satish, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you, and glad to be in the session as well.
Absolutely. So before we get to some of the fun stuff, we're going to talk about how you're supporting your customers on this front and some of the things that are your perspective on skills at work. Tell us a little more about who you are, what you do, please.
Absolutely. I'm Satish Kumar, CEO and co-founder of Glider AI. My mission at Glider AI is to make hiring fair and opportunity accessible. I work with companies and teams to bring innovation to our product, to bring a skill-based hiring and retention to life. And that is what I define as Glider AI skill validation platform. We leverage AI and automation to help bring a scale to skills for enterprise and high growth companies. Our platform addresses each stage of candidate to employee journey with candidate outreach, engagement, screening for tech and non-tech skill validation, interview, and practice-based learning, right? We want employees to maximize their human potential by discovering and improving their skill. That's in a nutshell what I am and what I do.
So you talked a little about things like practice-based learning and skill validation there in that intro for yourself. Can you talk for a minute about how organizations can align their learning development programs, their investments in that front with a skills-based approach? Because we hear a lot about that on the hiring side. I'd love to hear you talk about that when it comes to learning, development, and skill growth.
Absolutely. So to adopt a skill-first approach, companies truly need to understand its importance, since companies will have some existing methodology in their L&D at work today. And the way I look at it, that the skill is the tangible thing that company can track objectively, right? On the other hand, when it comes to employee, skill is that invisible oxygen that provides fuel to their performance and empower them to grow in their career. And these are personalized for individual and organization, right? So coming back to your question, and I think some of the findings in your study really set the stage for this question. As it is clear from the data that the company, its manager and employee all understand the importance of a skill-first people strategy, but there seemed to be some disconnect about how to make it actionable and relevant, right? I mean, I looked at your research that you conducted recently as well, and from that data, I figured out that 63% of the employee haven't had any conversation about the skills. And then look at the other side, another data point found that 72% of the employers don't even know their employee skills. So employers and employee are not having a proactive conversation. So it's clear that there need to be some sense of ownership and accountability for skill development. That would be the most important step to create the alignment. They need to foster a culture of learning. So the next step can be define the skill needed and basing that based on the current need as well as the future business need, right? And perhaps this is the most important thing for them to understand the composition of the skill across the company. And our deep focus on a skill, specifically validation, have benefited a lot of large organizations. Many of our customers use Glider AI to uncover that composition of the skills across organizations, leverage our assessment to validate those real-world skills, and simulate those scenarios like communication skills, technical competency, evaluation in a real-world environment. And this really provides the understanding of the skill gap and how to upskill and reskill at the same time. Identify where people with the skill could have been deployed in the organization and not only just progressing in the current career track. So if we can focus on these areas, that will really help organization align their L&D with the skill-first approach.
That stat that you mentioned, one of the ones in the research that sort of stunned me, was you'd mentioned 63% of employees said they haven't had that skills conversations. And what we see in the data is that's telling in itself. But we start cross-referencing that with other things, you start to see those employees who haven't had those conversations are much more likely to say, I don't have a clear future here. I'm not sure what my next opportunity is. I'm not sure if my company cares about the skills I'm supposed to be developing or has plans for me long-term. And we employers out there, all my friends out there, I'm talking to you, those people are saying, why aren't people engaged? Why aren't people connected? Why aren't they, seeing this positive future? And when those things are, that's an example of one reason why they're not. If they don't have those conversations and someone's not helping them see how their skills align with the direction of the company, they're not going to magically do it themselves. They need the company to help along that front. And I love the tie in there you have with a bigger skills-based approach that makes it very tangible to every single employee.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you mentioned a minute ago that Glider is helping employers to make these skills visible, make them tangible through some of the things you're doing there. So what are you seeing as the best practices for identifying or assessing the right skills? Because there are so many different roles, so many different types of skills. It's easy to get overwhelmed with that. What are you seeing as the best practice or the recommendation you would share to start down that path for employers that haven't done it yet?
Sure. So what we have seen in our customer base is that the most successful skill-based organizations are the companies that look at the skill across the entire journey from recruiting to retention, right? And you did mention that you've seen a lot of focus on the talent acquisition side, but in the talent management side, we want to understand how it fits well. So if you look at holistically, it makes a lot more sense from recruiting to retention. Now, to get started, the first thing we want to do is align the skill with the business strategy. That's a very common thing to say, but a lot of companies still miss that part. Basically, you need to make sure that the skills you are identifying fit with the overall goal of the company. Now, I can lay out some of the practices and processes that our team goes through when working with our clients to ensure that the skill-first approach to aligning the job with the skill and the skill with the job remains there. So to guide step by step, right? The first step could be identifying the skill needed based on the business objective and align that role based on those skills need, right? This ensures that the roles and the respective skills contribute to the long-term success. But then you have to engage the functional leaders to understand the specific skill needed across different teams and projects. And this uncovers the nuances for the roles and skill requirement, right? And this is a critical step to ensure that the accurate skills role mapping is completed. Now, you can break down the job roles into competencies. So you know that the technical, behavioral, leadership skill needed for the role to be successful are there, right? And the glider can automatically identify these skills based on the job requirement. And then the real part comes the validation of the skills. Glider customer leverage our assessments to validate whether talent possesses those skills to do the job today, but also emerging skills to support future business needs. And it is important that the assessment criteria is vetted by experts for fairness, reliability, and validity, right? And further, AI can help you confirm the skill integrity because now you're processing a large set of data to understand how people are responding to different skill and competency level. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that these attempts are indeed genuine and people are not using unfair means to show you the competency that they might not possess. So the technology can help you achieve all these tasks to much deeper way than possible otherwise by humans. And one last point I want to call out that we do need to measure the impact, right? You can link the skill to the KPIs, key performance indicators, and track metrics like productivity gain, right? For the TA time to fill open roles and how effectively employees are applying the skills to their jobs. This will help you understand which skill is driving the performance. So the last part is very important. People deploy different technology, process, methodology, but if they are not tracking the KPI objectively, which really what business is looking for, impact of those initiatives. And that's where the key focus should be.
As you're sharing that, one of the things that you said really stuck out to me around fairness and understanding and make sure this is the thing the person can actually do. I was having a conversation with some leaders earlier this week. We're talking about some of the new AI tools, ChatGPT and others, and how people are using that and passing that off as their own work. Increasingly, I know in the hiring process, a lot of the tools that y'all have built helped companies to make sure people are being fair. They're taking the test, they're showing their true performance, and you can measure them on those things. But I don't see this conversation happening as often when it comes to people who are already on staff. Thinking about how do I make sure that we're validating that skill that Satish is showing us he can do this thing in an assessment as an employee already. We're trying to test a skill out. You see that happening pre-hire where someone's trying to get the job, but you don't see that as often, the conversation around that. So I think some of the stuff that y'all have done on that front around the auto proctoring and some of the AI pieces around that are really helpful for employers that want some more confidence in their direction when it comes to that skill piece. So
I'll add one more part there that typically companies have done this rote evaluation. They're trying to understand their knowledge, but today what matters is their ability to be able to do the real world task, right? Knowledge today can be I can query OpenAI and get the answer whatever I need. That's not the point. Like, can you apply that knowledge to your day-to-day job? And to be able to assess that is the critical piece here. And the way we differentiate when we work with organizations that, hey, can we simulate the real world task that your employee will actually be performing? And that will give you much more deeper confidence in their competency to be able to be successful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any of us can Google an answer. It's a different thing to have to do it and put it in practice in real life and make sure that level of knowledge is a deeper thing. So, all right. So the last thing I wanted to ask you about today, because we're talking a lot about some of the skills, really having a clear picture of that, having something that we can depend on as employers and not just look at skill inferences and things like that, but real actual data that's validated. What sort of strategies do you think companies should be using to upskill, reskill their people? You talked about from hiring to retention. And this is the part I think that connects that retention piece. What are your thoughts on that? And how can companies do that better?
So on that note, I always say my customer that unless you track something, you can't improve, right? So one of the fair way would be that set a benchmark of where you stand today in terms of your skill mix, the skill mix in organization and the competency level, so that with each incoming employee, you can try to understand and raise the bar further, right? So for me, this is skill first means people first. People are dynamic in the organization, and a skill first strategy need to be equally dynamic, not a static, but really evolving. And I shared some of this earlier already. I believe that a skill first strategy to be successful, it need to be meaningful so that it makes difference, aligned with the company goals. It needs to be relevant to your people, right? A skill must align to business goals, but also to what your people want. It needs to be practical so that a skill can be applied to address the company need, the one that talked earlier, the real world evaluation, right? And most importantly, there needs to be accountability, right? So the true accountability comes through creating a company culture based on learning and skill development. And your data also showed that both employers and employee want this, right? So to add the structure of what I just laid out, I think I would lay it out by creating a tailored learning path, mentorship and coaching programs, offering continuous learning, and that also the practice-based training, right? And offer some skill certification to really cement that in the employee inventory skill system. And we must have this internal mobility programs that allow employee to move between department to gain new skill and perspective. One of the things in the L&D department I strongly encourage is to identify those transferable skills that are more generic in nature and give them opportunity to excel and explore other part of the department. Typically, new requisitions come and people try to just source from outside, but there's so much potential available inside the organization that is left untouched. And unless that they know the mix of the skill and the competency of those individuals, be it on the core skills, job skills, or domain skills, they can't even figure out who are actually available internally to be placed. So at the core of what I'm saying, skill is the key that enables organizations to really maximize the throughput of their organization capability.
The other piece that I came back to is I remember many years ago during the early days of my training in university and then for my certifications in HR, they really hammered home with this concept of transfer of training. When you're doing learning, anything in the learning context, whether it's mentoring, it's a training course, anything like that, the more closely you can have it mimic the real world, what it looks like, the better. And you've talked about practice-based learning and giving people a chance to learn experientially, because we see in the research that people primarily learn experientially. They don't want you to just tell them, they want you to show them and let me try it. And I don't want to do it in a live in front of a customer the first time. I want to do it in a safe space. So if I mess up, I can get that corrected before I'm out there in front of someone. We did a big piece of research earlier this year on frontline workers and learning. And one of the biggest reasons, other than their shifts and schedules being difficult to work with, the biggest reason for many of those workers that prevented them from learning at work was, I don't have a chance to practice or try this skill before I have to do it in real life. So there's some good things tied in from the data that are backing up what you're sharing here and emphasizing how important this is to the workforce, to the learners out there that we are supposed to be serving as HR and talent and learning leaders across the board. So if someone wants to,
and I'm so much excited to be working with a lot of HR and L&D leaders today who are really progressive. They want to make a difference, and today tools and technology are available to make that happen. And Glider is at forefront of that already.
So if someone wants to hear more about Glider AI and the work that you and the team are doing to help employers to get a clearer view of their skills, both pre-hire, post-hire, as they're going through all these sorts of things, what's the best way for them to connect?
Oh, absolutely. They can reach out to me directly as well. I'll share my email openly. It's satish@glider.ai, or they can reach out to website glider.ai and explore the product, solution, and resources. And they can reach out to us through that medium as well.
Okay, perfect. I'll make sure and get the link into the comments here so one can click right over check out Glider, learn more about the work you and the team are doing. I appreciate you so much for joining us, for sharing your passion on helping companies get a better handle on their skills, because it helps us to serve all the people better. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Ben. Appreciate it.
Right. Good stuff, man. George, I'm not gonna say anything.
that was a lot. There was a lot of great things I got in there. You just asked a question, Ben, and I know our friend Chris is in this conversation as well in the chat about the learning agility and ways that we could, really assess, because everything when it comes to business, especially for the CFO, and any money been spent, what's the ROI? How are we measuring these things, right? And one of the things that we did when we had our retail stores is we did what I call like the 360 assessment, right? So we did feedback within the organization. That was a full assessment of employees, the managers, peers, direct reports, right? And then how's this influencing our clientele, our customers, people that were coming in. So we'll do a random survey on that so we can get a full perspective of it. One of the things that I enjoy, and this ties back into like my definition of culture, feel, believe, behave, is really identifying some of those behavior and role-playing type scenarios where you're assessing that ongoing development through, I hate the word interviews, but one-on-ones or huddles or recaps and things of that nature. Just two things that I thought was very important, especially when it comes to developing those things. When we try to reskill, upskill, I think that role-playing role that we can do within the workplace scenarios is critical to help that as well.
I'm thinking about one of the comments that Nicole shared earlier is sometimes that we don't see our own things that we do well because it's just either a habit or it's something that comes to us more naturally. It's talent we're given. And so she was talking about how that's hard sometimes to pinpoint that. And that's why I'm always like, your 360 thing kind of hit that for me, George. Like, we've got to be getting input from other people around us. We've got to be giving that back to others. Hey, George, I saw you do this thing the other day. You may not realize it, but that was incredible because I don't have that skill. Next time that comes up, I'm going to bring you into that conversation because you're great at that. I literally have had that conversation with you in the last few months on certain things. And so that sort of thing, having others and hopefully having a leader that can speak into that for you, that's so powerful because you're like, oh yeah, I guess I do have that strength. And when you start realizing that, it also tells you, that's a strength, but I don't like it. Or that's a strength and I love doing that. Can I do some more of that? And you can start to shape and shift your culture or your career in that direction and what you're doing there. So good stuff there from Satish and the team at Glider. Appreciate him and the team for supporting the event. All right, we're going to go up to our next session. We have how to use performance to make the skills of people tangible. And I love this conversation with Jamie Aiken at BetterWorks because we're going to talk about performance and managing that and bringing out the best of our people and really trying to see what they're doing. It really is a good tie into this bigger conversation about making those things clear so we know if they're working towards the right things, developing themselves, and how the performance piece fits into this. So let's dive in with Jamie. I'm so glad you're here with us today. And we've been hearing some great sessions already, good thoughts, good ideas, good strategies around getting the most from our people and helping them be their best at work. And I'm so excited to have Jamie Aiken here with me from BetterWorks because Jamie, that's what she does every day. She's working with companies, helping them figure out how to maximize the performance of their people and get the most out of them and help people find some meaning and fulfillment in their work at the same time. So Jamie, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Absolutely. So before we get into some of the fun stuff we're going to talk today about skills, performance, and those kinds of things, would you take a minute and tell the audience more about who you are and what you do, please?
Absolutely. So Jamie Aiken, I'm the VP of HR Transformation at BetterWorks, and I come with 25 years as an HR practitioner. So I was mostly in the space of transformation and change, whether that be a business change, a cultural change, any sort of transformation. I seem to get pulled there in my career, and I love it because it's the space of innovation. And so you got it exactly right, Ben. I have the best job in the world. I get to talk to HR people every day, all day about what are the challenges that they're facing in their organizations, where they are wanting to take the employee and manager experience from where it is in their current place. And HR people love learning from HR people. So I get to share not only from my own experience, but also from what I'm seeing in the market.
Tremendous. Well, I'm excited to hear from you because you and I share a love for helping these leaders transform and approach things with a new perspective. And so just to kind of kick us off a little bit, I'd love to hear from you. I know you've been speaking on this topic pretty regularly. So what are some of the big things that are driving the skills gap today?
Yeah, there's a few, no question. I think the first one that has gotten a lot of press lately is that there's a significant portion of the workforce that's retiring. I think some are calling it the silver tsunami. And so the idea that we have this large part of our workplace that is leaving the workplace leaves some pretty big gaps in terms of skills and knowledge, frankly, in an organization. So I think that's one of the places where you're starting to see skills gaps come up. But also, and I would put this to the pandemic to a certain extent, that incoming workers aren't gaining the skills that they need at the same speed as previous generations. And it's not because they're not learning as fast. It's just that I think hybrid has, to a certain extent, gotten in the way of the speed in which folks were able to pick up on those skills in the past. And then, of course, we can't have a conversation without talking about AI, because AI is disrupting both businesses, but also roles and activities in an organization. So I think those three pieces, the silver tsunami, the incoming workers, and AI, are pretty big primary drivers of the skills gap today.
So it's interesting. I actually was recording a podcast recently with a chief learning officer at a medical organization, and we're talking about that. And one of the things that's the grandiose title, I came up with it on the spot, was called the career cliff. But yeah, I'm thinking about all of these leaders all these individuals who are using all the AI tools to get a job and then in their jobs. And I think about it like when if you're working out building a muscle, if you're not lifting the weight to build that muscle, when I put a heavier thing on there, you can't lift it. And so those people that are using some of these AI tools, not just is it disrupting things overall, but if I become reliant and dependent on that, am I going to be able to make those higher level decisions, perform at that higher level if I'm not performing at the basic level and building those building blocks up to that one? So there's lots of different pieces tied into the AI piece, not just it's changing jobs right now as we speak. Some other things around the people that are doing it too.
And I think on the opposite end of that scale are the folks that aren't using AI whatsoever. And so if you think about it in terms of that, there is a balance to be done, because there's learnings and efficiencies and innovation that can happen from employing AI in our roles as well. So I think we're seeing the gamut right now. I think over time, I mean, cell phones used to be one person out of 100 had one, and now
novelty,
right. So I think over time people will get more comfortable with it. But yeah, it's an interesting time for sure.
Okay, so those are some of the big things that you're seeing as you're talking to employers and serving the landscape there. So what are companies doing to respond or compensate for some of these things that are happening? Because any one of those could be cause for alarm or concern, but all of them together create a little bit of chaos, I would imagine.
Yeah, no question. And we just did a recent skill survey. Actually, it's coming out and will be available next week, asking a lot of different elements around skills. But one of the questions that we asked specifically is, how are you dealing with this right now? And I was actually surprised. 80% of the organizations that responded said that they'd adjusted their job requirements. And when I say adjusted, they lowered their job requirements based on the lack of skills. So, that's going to have an impact. But here's the other thing: the notion of internal mobility and talent mobility has always been something that HR has been doing to either a greater or lesser extent. I see some organizations that have great fluidity in their talent mobility and great strategy around it, and others not so much. And I think those laggards around building out a strategy that says, how are we making sure that we are seeing the skills and the talent within the organization that we have before, number one, we go out and recruit to it. We may already have that. But then also, how are we using that knowledge to move our talent around the organization where it's needed most?
That first stat you threw out there, around 80% of companies say that they're lowering the bar on some of those positions just to get people in the door. That's solving one problem, but it's creating another. Sometimes we do things in the moment because you're like, I don't have any other option. I've got to do this. Like when you make that hire because you've got a ticking clock, but they're not the highest quality person. This is the same sort of thing that's creates these issues down the line where we've got to develop them, we've got to manage the performance, we've got to, and often we're not communicating that clearly down the line to everybody else to follow. Like, we just got them in, we confirmed they accept the offer, and we stop there. And we don't say, hey, hiring manager, by the way, you're going to have to put extra time, extra mentoring, extra coaching, all along those things. What are your thoughts on that piece of it? Are you talking to leaders about that sort of compounding negative effect that's going to roll downhill?
Well, it's interesting because I just had a conversation earlier this week about one organization that had sort of resigned to the notion that they had a lot of folks that were retiring out of their population.
Mhm.
And then they were also confronting this issue. And so you mentioned one key word, mentoring, and the idea that they came up with is, why aren't we using the skills and the knowledge base of our almost to be retired? Like, why aren't we re-engaging them, extending their stay in the organization and having them act more like mentors to sort of help mitigate the skills gap? And so I think different companies are coming at it different ways, but I think the important thing is to not just get resigned to the fact that, gosh, we have all these folks leaving, what are we going to do? I think the idea of just lowering our expectations is sort of defeatist a little bit. I think we need to come up with some better and more innovative solutions.
Well, speaking of that, I think that one of the things that has confounded me a little bit, it's all the big conversations in the market around skills, focus on hiring for skills, skills-based learning, like those pieces, but if they leave performance out of the equation, and that's where it, like, the road meets the road to me. That's where we actually start making this, or it just all falls apart. It's a big, pretty picture on the slide somewhere, but we're not making it stick for our employees. So talk about performance management as a bigger part of this skills picture, and how you and the BetterWorks team see that fitting into this as companies are trying to make sense of what to do next.
Right. So it's interesting. From the same survey that we did, 70% of the respondents said that performance management was the single most important method for measuring the skills. But the challenge is, if you think of a traditional performance management program, it's you get your goals at the beginning of the year. Maybe there's a conversation midway through the year on development aspirations and goals, and then you do a final assessment at the end of the year. So it's very infrequent. It's usually pretty heavy from an administrative perspective. And I don't know about you, but nobody has ever told me that they get super excited and pumped on performance management day. It's pretty demoralizing for everybody involved. And I think it's been pretty well articulated in the HR community that nobody sees true value on the traditional way of doing performance management. And so BetterWorks thinks about performance and sort of flips it on its switch and thinks about it in terms of performance enablement, which is this idea that performance happens throughout the year. There's frequent conversations that are happening throughout the year, whether those be a goal discussion, but also, are there feedback conversations? Are there coaching situations where a manager and a direct report, and not only a manager, but also maybe a project manager or a peer, are giving feedback, recognition, all sorts of different moments over the course of the year. We're not talking about a heavy process either. We're talking about something that's relatively lightweight. But if you think about it, in each of those areas, whether I'm getting feedback, there is in there probably some evidence of a skill. If I've completed a course, there's probably evidence of a skill. If I'm getting recognition for communications, for example, that's evidence of a skill. So why aren't we mining all of those different moments for the skills, the skill evidence that is in each of those different elements, as opposed to in a more traditional way where one person, usually the manager, is assessing an employee on their body of work? This is much more democratic, and certainly that's what BetterWorks is exploring. And I think there's a reason why we've done more traditional, and why maybe performance management wasn't part of those discussions and skills. And I think it gets to how HR traditionally was constructed, which is that you've got a silo that thinks about, or a group or a team that thinks about recruiting. And then there's another group in HR that thinks about learning. Then you have some other group that's focused on performance. You get where I'm going?
Yes.
And I think what's happening or should be happening is we think more and more about the employee experience and the manager experience and what really truly moves the needle. Those silos, those walls need to melt down because there's all sorts of information in each of those, what used to be bubbles, that actually together create a true reflection on my, as an employee's body of work, in the recognition, in the feedback, in the goals that I accomplish, in the developments goals that I achieve. All of those elements truly do reflect not only my talent profile, but also my entire body of work, and not just based on one person's assessment. So I think that's where we're going. Certainly that's the way BetterWorks thinks about it, and why I'm so excited, because the old way isn't working. We need to do something differently, and it will truly force our hands in HR to think about the employee experience and the manager experience, as opposed to a HR process that needs to be completed.
So you just challenged me in the best way, because for a while I pushed back on employers that are only using something like a manager observation as the way to understand the skills of their people, because their bias can filter into that and everything else. But the picture you're creating here is, it's not just that single point in time where I passed Jamie by and I'm like, okay, yes, check that off, that she's got that skill. But over time, I'm seeing your work. I'm being able to weigh in on that. I'm seeing feedback from other people. I'm looking at these other pieces, right? We're setting goals around that. It's not just a single, like, passing by glimpse of you, but it's a true full picture, comprehensive across all these different inputs you're talking about.
Absolutely.
And that pushes me to think about this in a different way than I have in the past. So I love that, because usually I push back a little bit about, is that the best way to do it? And maybe it is what it is. We can debate that, but is it the easiest way because we're already doing performance? Let's weave this into that. I think so, as far as low risk and low lift to get that plugged in there.
Well, and Ben, here's the other thing. There's an awful lot of teams that are now being formed for a short period of time where they'll have goals of their own. And so that the manager may not have great oversight on, but as a team, wouldn't you want to get that information, that insight, that feedback from that team as well as part of the profile that will be my body of work? My answer is absolutely. If I have if I'm working on a project for 6 months that's not necessarily directly in control of my boss, again, I would like to be able to have that project manager and the peers that are on there also feeding into my talent profile. So I think it becomes much more democratic, much less biased.
We're using this term body of work, and I love that, because it's easy for some of us to just put our head down and think, okay, I've got to do this task list today. But everything you're accomplishing becomes a part of that bigger body of work, that stamp you're leaving on the organization, on the people you're serving, all of those things. And so I love that casts a different perspective on that one as well. Goodness, I knew you were going to bring some fun stuff to us today, and I'm loving all of this. So if someone wants to hear more about BetterWorks, how you're helping to enable this for the companies you're working with and supporting, what's the best way for them to do that?
I would encourage, if you are going to, of course, this is conference season for HR people. So if you're going to HR Tech, if you're going to Gartner UK or Gartner Orlando or Unleash, we will be there. So you can come and talk to us in person. Otherwise, a good starting point is to go to betterworks.com. And there's a lot of great information and resources and upcoming webinars that I would encourage folks to come and join.
And I bet the research you've cited a couple of times is going to be tied in there as well, so they can find all those good things. So check that out. We'll make sure and drop that into the comments for all of you out there listening in. Thank you again, Jamie, for joining us. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay, good stuff, man. I love hearing from Jamie there around performance, around helping our people be and do the best, be their best, do their best work, all that kind of stuff in the workplace. And some of her conversations I saw in the chat, it kind of lit y'all up, like, the old way of doing this from performance perspective doesn't work. Yes, we're on the same page with that. But I love how she's creating this picture that we're all individually contributing this bigger body of work, and thinking about yourself like Michelangelo would look back at this set of things that he created in his lifetime and these things that he contributed back to the world. And every one of us are doing that every single day. I talked to a leader, and I'll pass it off to you, George. I talked to a leader a little while back who had just retired. And I asked him about what he felt his biggest legacy was. What was your biggest contributions? And he didn't list out this cool project. He didn't talk about that time he hit his metrics for the quarter. He talked about the relationships that he had and the people that he had the opportunity to influence and grow. that was the biggest legacy and most important part for him looking back over 6 decades of working life. So that was really powerful to me to hear that from him, because I was like, okay, I think about the stuff we're doing, but it needs to be more about the people we're pouring into. George, anything else from you on the takeaways for that one?
Yeah, I think it sums up the importance of relationships, right? Do we as leaders, we talk about mentorship. For me, when I'm choosing a mentor, I want somebody that's going to be able to tour me through something that they've either experienced or I've gone through myself. But part of that relationship is the trust factor, is that transparency. And I believe that, like, whether it's mentorship, whether it's providing coaching for your employees, I think what it does in terms of bridging a gap, in terms of being able to bring balance to both what they have as knowledge and what they have as a skill set and talent, all together to align with what you do as a company, right? And so a lot of us know what we do as a job, but why do we do it? And how do we get those concepts? I think a lot of that is developed in those relationships. And as we see, and we'll see some of this research a little bit later, the importance of that relationship between that leader and the gaps where people feel like there's a disconnect. Why are people leaving that we are providing, skills trainings for? There's reasons for all those things. I think it ties into that relationship and trust, and a lot of things that she was saying, and just kind of pinpointing on to what's important in the workplace today in terms of leadership and employee connections.
Yes, absolutely. Well, so I've grabbed this comment from Lucy there. Lucy, you've been chiming in all day. Thank you. Stay tuned. Your name's going to be on that list at the end here today. But Lucy mentioned that this plays into how the company responds to things in the market. That's what organizational agility is. How we respond to changing conditions, disruptions, new competition, an issue that's makes it hard for us to access a certain talent pool we've had in the past. Any number of things that create a crunch for the company. That comes down to organizational agility and the ability for us to help our people adapt, to help them change, to help them respond to those things. That's a big part of it. You're grinning big. So you're reading all the comments about you. I know you. I can tell. So thank you to all of you again for chiming in. We've got one more fireside chat session with Mike Bollinger from Cornerstone. And I grabbed Lucy's comment specifically because Mike and I talk about organizational agility and how developing the skills of our people fits into that. So it was a perfect tie-in for this last session here. Then we're going to go into sharing some of the data, some of the research we've been kicking around with you so far. You've heard some little snippets and pieces. We're going to give you some of those insights on the employer side, how leaders like you are responding, as well as on the workforce side, what our people are saying they need from us and how we can develop them. So let's dive in with Mike Bollinger. And here we go. Welcome to the last fireside chat here at the event before we dive into some of the research. I'm so excited to have here with me one of my longtime friends, person who I highly respect, Mike Bollinger from over at Cornerstone. Mike, welcome, my friend. Glad to have you.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, I'm having a great day, and I hope
it sounds like it.
Yeah. Hey, I am pepped up, man. This is going to be a blast. So before we get into some of the fun stuff that we're going to talk about today around agility and skills and those kinds of things, would you take a minute and tell the audience more about who you are and what you do, please?
Sure. Mike Bollinger. I am the Global VP of Strategic Initiatives at Cornerstone, and that means I do stuff. Some of the stuff that I do includes the Cornerstone People Research Lab and some of the things that we've done over that with the last couple of years, in conjunction with Lighthouse, of course. In the last couple of years, I've taken on a role where I lead not only the strategic initiatives of the part of the Cornerstone Galaxy product, but I also work directly for our Chief Product Officer, Karthik Suri, around the platform components of Galaxy. So that means that I have skills and I have integrations and end-to-end experiences and alliances and partnerships and a much broader remit in that regard. So I continue my industry presence as well as work very actively to bring Cornerstone Galaxy to life in that regard.
Tremendous. So one of the things you mentioned in there was skills, and I'd love for you to cast a little bit of a vision on this. We heard a little from our keynote panel earlier about the importance of that and why they're leaning in on that as leaders from that space. But as someone who works alongside hundreds and hundreds of companies that are trying to think through these things, why do you think the skills conversation is one that is such a high priority right now?
Well, it's actually occurred over the last couple of years, and there's a number of reasons for it. One of the things that I like to think about is I go back to early days, which, when dinosaurs roamed the earth in the mid-2000s. And we were still able to do some of these things with skills. We could set up key skills and abilities, and we could compare those and do gap analysis and do training from it. But the problem was that it was so difficult to maintain that because there were volumes of data that were associated with that, and it varied rapidly, that we steered away from it at the time. Well, fast forward another 15 years with the advent of big data and machine learning and artificial intelligence and all those things, and that then has resurfaced this notion of skills. Now, why is that important in my mind? And I know you've heard from the panel a variety of different things, but there's some things around skills that allows you to deconstruct the work, if you will, into task-based. So it creates a democratization. It creates an element of workforce agility, which is very much where we're focused, and a readiness. And so companies have always needed, but even more so, need workforces that can adapt really, really quickly. Depending on who you ask, the average technical shelf life of a skill is 2 to 3 years. That's the half-life. The human skills obviously remain more relevant, but this notion of being able to create agility within an organization that's very focused on the tasks at hand, and what I always call the have, want, need. What do I have? What do I need? Looking around corners and then making that available for what the employees want is where the skills conversation has created such a high priority. It ended up focusing a lot on recruiting. It's now very much around working internally with the internal stakeholders so that that continuous evergreen aspect of it as a part of the overall workforce development strategy.
I've never heard anyone else talk about it in the how you started off there saying, listen, we've been doing these types of things for a long time, but it was hard to do manually. I've used the phrase a couple of times in the last few years talking about this process or that process, saying the technology's finally caught up to the way we've been trying to work for a long time. And that sounds like what you're saying here. We've been trying to do this as a HR function, as a learning function for a long time. Manually, if you had the resources, the time, the people, you could get that done, but it still was really tough to maintain that once you had begun. But now the technology is caught up and made that possible, and we can start capitalizing on that insight, that data, the skills of our people across the board.
Well, it used to be a Jenga stack. Now it's Legos. They actually interlock, right? Maybe that's the way to look at it. But at the end of it, the result, we came up with competencies as a much broader perspective, and that worked. But the real promise and the real excitement now that the technology is caught up around skills, task-based approaches is very, very interesting. I love it.
Yeah, it's a fun conversation to have, both at a micro level around what sort of opportunities exist for Mike and how do we help him find that path and how do we grow this certain skill to move in that direction, all the way up to the, well, who we want to be as a company. A year from now, 5 years from now, what kind of company do we want to be? And how do we start moving in that direction, one person, one skill at a time? That sort of thing to me is compelling. So that sort of ties in with the next thing I want to ask you about. So you mentioned readiness a minute ago. You talked about agility and how these things fit into that bigger picture. I'd love to hear you talk about that at a broader level. How does this skills conversation fit into a business's ability to adapt, to change, to shift whenever something demands that, like, I don't know, a pandemic or other disruptions?
Well, a lot of that varies obviously by industry. For example, if I'm a healthcare industry, that workforce agility really is aligned with nursing shortages, as an example, or other healthcare professionals as demand for services change. In tech, obviously, the tech market is being horribly disrupted. Horribly is probably the wrong term, but very much disrupted.
Greatly disrupted. Yes.
Let's call it that and move on. But very disruptive in the technology space and manufacturing. I mean, lights out manufacturing and automation have changed the traditional manufacturing jobs to be very much a whole new set of skills. So if you think about that, and those are just some examples from an industry perspective, every company is going through disruption at one level or another, whether it be technology, whether it be the changing nature of the work. It's evolving those skills rather than the roles. It's the skills that are evolving and becoming key to remaining competitive. That's the agility, if you will. And the readiness gap then is this notion of the gap between what I have and what I need. As a matter of fact, for the audience, there's a website called skillsclock.io. And it's put on, it's data that's global in nature and you can disaggregate it. But literally, they talk about 800 billion people in the upcoming workforce area that don't have secondary skills, don't have the ability to do technology kinds of skills. And that doesn't mean that these are individuals who can't use their iPhone. It means they can't do pivot tables. They can't come up with results that are associated with what's being given back to them. So this gap, this readiness gap, is something that we have to address as organizations, given the pressures that we have in our own individual markets.
I'll make sure and drop that link to that into
Please
the
do.
notes
Please
and the comments here.
It's
So people can
very
check it out.
useful. Yep.
I'm sure people right now are like, what was that? I'll skillsclock.io. I'll drop it into the chat here. But I think things like that help to make this more real, because one of the ways I've heard it put, and you probably heard this too, is we're great generally as humans at responding to something that's immediately in front of us. You see a fire, you know how to put it out. But if someone said, hey, 5 years from now, there's going to be a fire, we don't care about it until the day it happens. And so that entire 5 years, we could put something in place to make sure that doesn't come to pass. And yet it's not urgent, so we don't prioritize it. And the skills piece to me feels the same way. Right now, when we're talking about, oh, well, yeah, someday these skills may be obsolete, may not be adaptable, may not be able to do the work. Like, yeah, that feels like a tomorrow problem, not today problem. I've got something else that's worrying me today. And yet the companies that we're seeing that are thinking about this are thinking about both the today piece and the tomorrow. How do I make sure that we're leaning forward, looking at this, planning for those? Because as you said, like all these different industries, to pick your industry, and some of you out there listening are like, he didn't call my industry. That's fine. What yours are, what your challenges are you're facing within your organization, within your bigger space. And that's the comment there is still true. There is disruption that's taking up any number of spaces. And if we're not thinking about that long-term piece, then we're hamstringing ourselves. We're not going to be able to adapt quickly enough. Humans just don't have the ability to change twice as fast because we suddenly decided it's urgent today.
Well, and companies that are doing this well, and everybody's on their own individual journey, and no one is there, right? It's evolving.
Yes.
But the ones that are doing it well recognize that I have to be in a training mode or a development mode for those technical skills, but they're also really aware of the bridgeable skills, which tend to be, we used to call them soft skills, but at Cornerstone, we call them human skills. And so it's those bridgeable skills that create the ability for you to constantly evolve, even with the technical skills at the same time. Simple skills like emotional intelligence and adaptability and empathy and those kinds of things. So thinking about it from a bridgeable perspective and an adaptable perspective, and then focusing on making sure that there's continuous development in the human skills is where we're seeing real significant advantages for companies that have tackled the problem.
What's funny is when I hear you talk about that, the first thing that I want to challenge on, and I know that y'all already have a solution for this, the first thing I want to challenge on is, okay, great. I can test someone's technical skills. I can give them a technical assessment and see what they do. It's a little bit harder to test some of the other skills that are a little bit harder to put your finger on. I had a chance earlier this summer. I visited with the Cornerstone team in Orlando, and I brought my 14-year-old twins with me because I was out there out of school. And so we got a chance to put on the VR headsets and see some of the stuff the team has been building. And my daughter, I'm listening to them do their little experiences. I'm doing mine, and they're being asked these situational questions. And they're like, oh gosh, what's the answer? I don't know. And through that, they're experiencing what it feels like to do that in real life. And they're learning those sorts of human skills you're talking about. How do I navigate this conversation without making Mike feel like I'm going to toss him out on his rear end? How do I like connect with someone else? And it's this VR experience doing that. So I was going to say, like, the hard part for a lot of people when they hear you talk about that, Mike, is, oh, technical skills, great. I can teach this person to weld and I can see if their weld is good or not. How do I know if they're good at communicating with someone else? If there's no blowups, do we assume it's good? And you can look at tools like that instead to start measuring and calculating and understanding that on a deeper level and put them through their paces in a safe space. So I want to give y'all a shout out because that was still cool. They still talk about it, even though months later, it was this thing that they were completely stumped by in the moment. And like, hey, welcome to my world.
I remember that. No, there's a look, it's a preponderance of signals that allow you to indicate whether or not someone is achieving a level of mastery. And it's everything from observation checklists to the immersive experiences. It's not just, hey, I got the skill and I took a course. It's all those other things that we account for that create the set of signals that tell you how far someone is progressing in that journey.
What kind of signals would a company be thinking of? Should someone be thinking about looking for some of those other types of skills? I'm kind of curious when you say that. That's the first thing I think of is what are we looking at? Are we looking at 360s? Are we looking at performance data? Are we looking at other things about their ability to perform on the job? What are your thoughts?
Yes.
Yes,
We
and okay.
we call it a confidence ladder, right? So there's certain things where I might indicate I have the skill, or a piece of software will infer based on some background that I may possess this skill. So that's step one. There could be 360s and manager feedback. That's potentially step two. A lot of work, you bring up welding. Most welding job interviews are literally on the job interviews, and they're not interviewing you in an office. They're asking you to weld, right? So there's an observation component that's a part of that. The immersive environment that you talked about allows you to assess and evaluate and reinforce in a safe space, if you will. There's other things we go out with Skyhive, which is part of the Cornerstone family, and we ingest 20 terabytes a day of various kinds of data, which could be work representative data, patent information, materials that are being posted in various channels, and so on. And we do that with a combination of scraping and subscribed services, and we create what we call fluid classification. And then obviously there's the learning data and the performance data that we carry as well. If you pull all these together, they're all individual signals, but the preponderance of the direction of those signals is where you start to be able to indicate mastery and potentially areas of improvement.
Okay. So I'm going to give the audience a challenge really quickly. For all of you out there listening, I'd love for you to take a second and drop in the chat the skill you think is most important for someone who's working as a learning or HR leader. I'd love for you to drop that in the chat because I'm kind of curious to see what everybody comes up with there. What skill is most important, do you think, in your opinion? And again, we'll see some variation in that depending on your degree of experience, your specific focus area, your industry you're in, all those things, but it'd be fun to see. So y'all drop that in the chat as I'm finishing up here with Mike. So Mike, any other advice you would give to our friends out there that are trying to get their arms around this skills conversation to figure out how to understand their people, or even if they're farther back saying, we don't even know like what this is for? Anything else you'd share with them that might be helpful, directional, or just a good place to starting point for them?
Sure. Look, don't make skills a science project. It's not this taxonomy is the right taxonomy, that taxonomy is better. Learn to crawl before you run. Learn along the way. Make sure that when you think about it, skills is not the outcome. Look for specific problems that you want to solve, and then focus on what we call critical skills. We do something we call critical skill models or capability models, so you can focus what particular skills you think are important to that problem by business unit, by leader, by role, by geo. And so start there, learn to crawl before you run. Don't make it a science project. Look for some specific outcomes with critical skills. Understand two other things. There's a change management aspect to this. I should have written crossing the chasm. You've heard me say this, Ben. I talk about Bollinger's 20-20-40-20 rule. The first 20%, they're the early adopters. The next 20%, they're competitive. The next 40%, that's the way we're going to go. That's the way we're going to go. And the last 20% are really resistant to change. Change is about loss. Focus on that first 20% and let the snowball take effect from there. And then finally, think about it when you think about solving that problem. Think about it from what we call have, want, need. You want to be able to understand what you have. You want to be able to look around corners with data and look at what you may need to solve those specific incomes, and then present that need to your employees so that they can make some active choices. The best learner is an engaged learner. The engaged learner is one that has real interest in the next step in their process. And so overall, those are just some thoughts. Everybody's on an individual journey.
Okay. I appreciate that so much. Like I love you come back to the have, the want, the need piece, because I think that's a good set of takeaways for everyone who's looking for something here as a good hook into the rest of the conversation. Think about those components there because it'll give you a good framework to talk to your own leadership about this, to think about this as a strategy for your organization as well. So Mike, if someone wants to learn more about how Cornerstone is doing this, how you're supporting employers moving down this journey, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, they could reach out to me directly. I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn. I'm happy to do that. But Cornerstone's a Cornerstone's a big company. CornerstoneCSOD.com, CornerstoneOnDemand.com. Look up Cornerstone Galaxy, which is the Cornerstone AI-powered workforce agility platform. See us at HR Tech. Come see us at HR Tech. I'll be there, happy to do that. There's a variety of ways, but if you just look up Cornerstone Galaxy, you will find a myriad of connection points that you can take advantage of.
All right. So good stuff with Mike there. I love hearing from him. He was challenging George some of his like takeaways. Is it Jenga? Is it Lego? Is it the 20-20-40-20? Like his rule for getting people moving in the right direction, change management. So I loved getting some notes from him on that, because it reminded me of talking to you, George, about some of the way you approach this stuff. Anything in Mike's conversation there that was fun for you? I know you were flagging some of the comments in the audience about like the key skill for HR that they thought was most important. What stood out to you?
I mean, just on the end note, some of the key skills, and it varies. One of the things I love that the takeaway for me is, we talk about the soft skills. And when I think about soft skills, sometimes soft skills are hard skills, right? And the things that we need, for me, understanding that it is a human skill. Like we can all develop these things. It is in us. Naturally as humans. Sometimes there's a lack, right? For me, growing up in a certain situation, some of it is environmental, right? I didn't have a lot of empathy growing up. I had a lot of tough love, right? Until I met an empathetic leader, and I understood what it meant. Now I love the empathetic leader. I think when we first started, when you first asked everybody what's the one skill, I think we had 5 people right off the bat that said empathy.
It was fast.
And
yes.
So fast, like, right? That's the natural. Why is that? I think a lot of what we desire, a lot of what we have become as leaders is really a reflection of one or two things. It's what we've experienced that meant the most to us by somebody who was impactful, or what we really desired that we had at a dream job that we left because we were lacking that thing, right? We were lacking communication. We were lacking honesty. And we want to be around those things. And so developing those skill sets. And for me, it's, I always say we're human. We're in this human resource, but we don't put a lot of human within our resources. We don't put a lot of empathy behind the resources that we're providing, whether it's, documentation, whether it's through technology, whatever it may be. As you said, you cannot replace a lot of the human skills with AI. When I'm telling AI to write me something, I have to remind it that I want to come from an empathetic leader, right? We got to be able to share those things. And so, at the end of the day, for people, technology is a great thing. AI is a wonderful thing. But when I need a hug or support or a word of encouragement or affirmation, AI is not just going to come to me naturally because it can read me. That leadership in relationship is vital to those things. And so human skills, things that we can all develop. And by hug, I mean, I'm a hug dealer.
Yes, there we go. The good news for everybody out there is that we will not have another break where George is off camera for any time, so he will not be able to change again without getting really awkward. Don't do it. Don't you dare. This will be a live stream to remember. So, hey, we're having some fun here. We've enjoyed hearing from all of you in the comments. We'd love hearing from our panelists today from the sessions. George and I are going to share now for the next 25 minutes or so some of the data from the research, share some things with you. We've got a list of people to give some things away to for all of you who've been chiming in and sharing in the chat and being active today. We appreciate each and every one of you. So we've got a couple people to give some things away to. And let me see, I've got one more thing to set up here, and we'll jump into this. All right, get my stuff shared back up and we'll dive into it. Okay, George, you ready to go?
Born ready.
I say ready because I'm the one who's going to be talking first. So I'm asking you if I'm ready, essentially. Okay, so we're going to share some of the data with you from this research study we've completed earlier this year, things that employers, things that the workforce is caring about when it comes to learning, development, growing our people. And so the first big question we always ask is, what are your priorities? What do you care about? What are you focusing on? And you see here, I've compared last year to this year because there were some pretty big jumps, things that leveled out, things that changed. Probably no surprise. You look at number 3 here on the list. AI, automation, jumped up off the charts compared to the previous year, seeing a lot of things around that. And as we've seen in the comments, Nicole had some good comments on this today. George had some things he was talking about just now. We're seeing in the research that it's not just about, can we use AI in this thing, but how is AI affecting our workforce and the people? And what's our responsibility to help support that or govern that or protect our people or to make sure that, hey, those skills are going away. So you've got to focus on these new ones. One of the ways I put that in the book when I wrote about this a couple of years ago was if you are in HR and your only skill you've got, your only strength is data analysis, you better get another skill quick because AI is better at that than we are, but it can't do some of the other things that we can do naturally, as we've talked about pretty heavily in the last little bit. So a couple of big things there. AI jumps, more focus on really knowing our learners and what their needs are, what their priorities are. I'm looking at the ones where the dark blue outpaces the light blue compared to previous years. But for a couple of years, reskilling, coaching, those two have been way out there beyond everything else. And they're steadily kind of coming back. I think there's a big push there. And now companies are starting to kind of bring it back under control as they're figuring out how to fit that into everything else that they're focusing on from a development perspective. George, this next that I think is what I was thinking of as you were sharing a minute ago around AI. When we ask companies, has AI changed the pace of work? Only 13% said no. For the rest of us, it's like, yes, to some degree or a whole lot. It's changing the pace of things at work, how much we're able to get done, how much is being thrown at us. If you were here with us for one of our live streams earlier this year, I talked about how candidates were using tools to try to get interviews, get jobs using AI to try to beat employers at that game. So part of this, George, I want to throw this to you and get a take from you on this, is we ask companies, have you looked at what jobs might be at risk of this? And so the hope here is that we're thinking about our employees, what skills they have, what sort of risk might be posed to them, because if we're not, and they get surprised by this, that's going to create some negative sentiments and negative outcomes. So that's a big challenge that we have to be thinking about. George, I'd love to hear from you. If you are a leader at an organization and you have gone through and done some analysis on this and you've realized, hey, we have 20% of our people who are at risk here, how would you go about approaching them, communicating that to them? Probably not an email, I'm imagining. Like, what would you do to try to get them on board with this vision for this is where technology is going and here's where we're going to have to go with from a skills perspective for those people?
Yeah, I think first off for leadership, and I said it earlier in the chat, when we're discussing change, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is change to us? And for me, growing up, change was always about opportunities for growth. Without change, there could be no growth. That was my mindset. Now with growth, sometimes it can be painful, right? You look at it, from any analogy, whether it's a plant, whether it's a tree,
building a muscle,
whatever it is, muscle. And let's use that analogy for somebody who's lifting weights, right? For somebody who's lifting weights and starting off for the first time, that night or that next day, it is painful.
Yeah,
it hurts. You use things that you haven't used before, right? But over a span of time, 3-4 months after, if the weight doesn't change and you're still lifting the same amount of weight, it becomes easier and easier. Why is that? Is because it's been repetitive. And it's not the weight that has changed, it's the person underneath the weight that has changed. The more we lift things to our people, that was really good. The more we lift things for our employees, the more we encourage them and embrace that change, the easier it becomes for them over time. And so with that, for me, I'm sitting down and letting them know how excited I am for who they are, but I'm more excited about where we could be and what can I do as a leader, right? I'm checking in with you because if we don't check when our employees are, eventually our employees will check out. So I'm checking in with you as an employee, and I want to know what I can do to help you embrace this change, because this is what I found out, right? So we do the feel, felt, find, the F3 law. This is how I feel. This is what I felt. And this is what I found out the moment I was able to embrace it. Right. And so embracing that change is vital when it comes to technology, just like anything. And he said it earlier, was, there was 1 in a million phones, and now there's 1 million to 1 when it comes to people without phones. It takes time, and that is true. But how do we maximize the time with efficiency to embrace this change comes to understanding where George shuts up and then listens. So, hey, I'm excited about it. I understand there could be some necessary changes that can be struggling, but change is incredible. And we want you here for the long haul. And this is what you can do for it, right? And then give them those skills and that transparency that they need, that they can trust you through this process. Hopefully that's there as a leader. But first, I'm talking about change. I'm talking about the why I believe in them and what this change can do for them, not the company. Right? Because we always think what's best for the company, what's best for you, whether you're here for the next 3 weeks again, for the next 3 years. This is why I want you to embrace this, because AI is not going to replace people. AI may replace people that are not using AI. Right. And so how are we adapting those changes?
Yeah. Okay. I like the idea of positioning this as something that we're excited about on their behalf. Hopefully we get them along for that same vision that we have for that. So Jennifer is pinging me in the chat about what are the demographics. And I thought I had this in here. I must have actually hidden that slide. We have 1,200 different organizations around the globe who've responded to this. So it's not just US, but it is a global survey. So 1,200 companies is statistically significant. Always hard to say that out loud. And so we've got a good data set here that shows us what employers that are mid-size and large, especially, what they're thinking about, what their priorities are in that. So good call out there. Always good on the data about sharing the background and what sort of audience we have, because I want you to know that you can stand on this and rely on the data as it is. Okay, a couple more data points here on the employer front, things that we need to know or things that are important. And I've called a couple of these out today as we've gone through, because they're that challenging for me that we need to address them. So the number one there, 2 out of 3 talent leaders say their workforce is not highly adaptable to change. So we gave them a scale and said they're somewhat adaptable, they're highly adaptable. And 2 out of 3 said they're not highly adaptable to change for their workforce. And so when it comes to that, when something happens, I don't know, a pandemic, we'll say, or something I mentioned earlier, the other challenges that might face a company, new competition enters the space. We have a new product we're trying to launch. Those things that are going to change the company, change what we're doing, change around us. If our people are not able to respond to those, it's going to cost us something. It's going to slow us down. It's going to hinder our ability to be successful organizationally. Not only that, but when it comes to knowing the skills, we talked about that earlier, about not having that clarity. Put it this way. Let's say not knowing the skills of your people has a cost to the business. And if you were like, I'm not sure about that, think about it this way. Think about the sales data your company has. If you have a list of contacts that are outdated, that are old, that are not good anymore, your sales team is not going to get the full value out of that list. It's going to cost you something in wasted time and effort. If your financial data, your accounting systems are a mess, the data don't match, it's kind of a hodgepodge of things, that's going to cost you something, both today and long term, in terms of missed opportunities and everything else. The same thing is true of our people. If we don't know what our people can do, we can't tap into them when the moment arises. We can't leverage their best skills and talents in our work day to day. We miss a chance to tap into and capitalize on that and help them realize their best work. Just like you were pointing to a minute ago, George, help them be excited about what they can do and where they can contribute. All right. And then the last one here, when asked about those employers that think AI is changing the pace of work, those companies that said yes are much more likely to be leaning into a culture that promotes learning. Probably no surprise. That's one of those, yeah, sure kind of things, but it's a priority for them because they know that's their way of shifting and getting beyond this. If things are changing, we've got to grow our people past this change, or we're going to limit ourselves long-term and not be able to have the impact we want to have. And we've heard from our friends, Cornerstone, BetterWorks, Glider today, about technologies that support learning, that support skills growth, support adaptability from a company perspective. We asked leaders like you, how do these tools affect agility? How do these affect your business ability to respond? And the number one way, come back to the performance piece, George, was this makes the things we're trying to do here at a company level relevant and applicable and helpful to the people. They're a guide to our people at their individual level and their individual roles as they're going through work, because it funnels down there, ties into productivity, and then it lets us see our development data. Who are we developing? How are we growing them? What skills are on our roadmap for what we're trying to get people to? What's the gap between there and where we are today? All those kinds of things help our companies be more agile, be more responsive, be able to adapt quicker to change. And it comes down to helping enable our people to do that at a micro level, one-on-one, every single day. George, anything else you want to call out on the employer side for our transition to some of the learner stuff? I know we've got a couple specific call outs for you over there.
No, let's jump over.
All right. As far as you're muted, you muted yourself and we're not going to respond to me. Okay. So on the learner side, so here's our demographics for this one. So 1,000 learners around the world, all these age groups, demographic, like locations, everything else. We got a ton of responses to this. So this is what you should have seen from the employer side. I did not share that a minute ago. Apologies. But just to show you, this is a broad study, and we have a tremendous set of insights on what people think, what their priorities are, and all that good stuff. George, I'm going to kick this first one off to you because this is one that I think is so interesting, so relevant, and probably not a way we thought about this ourselves. As someone who's worked as an HR leader, I never stopped to think about, we're creating these memorable, positive experiences for people. But when someone tells us they've had a memorable and very positive learning experience at work sometime in the last year, they're much more likely, 70% more likely to say, I plan on staying in my jobs. I'm much more likely to be happy in my work and not be planning to quit my job. What are your thoughts on that, around the experiences we create for people and how that affects their vision or their future at the company?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is early in the conversation. We talked a lot about, the word culture was thrown up in the conversations. And when it comes to whether it's enhancing employee engagement, whether it's, how do we find fulfillment within the workplace, that memorable, lasting, positive relationship, it goes back again. I don't want to preach leadership. But the sustainability of all aspects of that is derived with, hey, how does my leader make me feel? If you want to have a great place to work, if you want to be involved, not just in the work that we're doing, but also in the employees day to day, I think employees see a clear path for professional development, as we've been talking about. I think they see an opportunity where they're happy and excited about their job. We call it job satisfaction. And then the L word, not love, but loyalty, that we all desire as leaders. We want them to be loyal to the company. You find that those things increase when the workplace leadership is investing in their people. They're investing in the comprehensive skills. They're investing in the development and those initiatives that really signals to the employee that I don't just matter as an employee for profits. I matter because they're developed me as a career. I have room to grow and I'm evolving within this organization. And so when it comes to those things, why do these things happen? I think it's a reflection of leadership. I think it's how people feel, right? And that's the culture. How you make me feel is what I'm going to believe about you and this organization. And my belief is going to turn into the behavior that I'm implementing. So that behavior is more positive through that learning experience because of how the company is empowering them and making them feel on the day-to-day.
So that's a great tie into the next thing. So the day-to-day, how they feel, a big contribution to how someone feels is how their interaction with other people. And so one of the things that stands out to me is only 37% of our workforce has had a conversation in the last few months about what their skills are, where they're going, what sort of future they have at the organization. So this across the board is sort of what we see. But what's wild is when you start looking at these by how this affects everything else they see about their work experience. So I'm going to flip over to this next one because it shows some things that are the flip side of what you were saying, George. You're like, hey, the positive stuff, here's the good things, here's all the benefits. But if we're not doing that, here's some of the negative things, the challenges. So when people have not had a conversation with their manager in the last 12 months, okay, I gave them that's a long time to not talk to your leader about skills at all. In the last 12 months, they're twice as likely to say that our culture is one that cares only about the business results and not about developing our people, which is not a place that we want to be. We have to balance that as HR leaders. We do support the business. We're a business function. But if we're not helping our people to be leveraged to their fullest extent, to get their value out of work, to be able to contribute in a mighty way, then at the end of the day, the business is going to suffer for that. They're not going to get the most, and the people are going to burn out or just quit entirely, or they'll quit and stay, as we talked about earlier. Okay. They're more likely to be unsure with their future. I mentioned that one earlier in the stream. They don't know what their future looks like because no one's talking to them about what that vision looks like. The way I often put it is, if I'm not talking to someone about their future at our company, when someone calls them from the competition, they'll paint a picture that's beautiful and rosy and wonderful. And that's why the grass looks greener over there, because we haven't told them what the grass looks like on our side yet. So we've got to get that across to them and make that cemented in their mind, what their vision, what that future could be, and where their role is in that. And there's less likely overall to feel like they're making a difference in their work. They're not driven to that. They're not focusing on giving the extra effort. We often talk about what does engagement mean for employees? Well, one of the definitions is that extra effort someone's willing to give between, I'm good, or I'm going to take the extra time to do that thing. They're not putting that extra effort. They're not feeling driven to do that if they have not had these conversations. So this isn't the only factor, obviously, in someone's satisfaction at work and their ability to grow their skills. But that interaction with that direct leader around what their skills are and what the future looks like is a powerful motivator, a powerful lever for people, or in this case, a powerful demotivator if it's not done properly. All right, I've talked a whole lot, George. I'm going to pass this off to you because we pulled some data on the DEI side. I'm going to let you touch on that, the things that were some of the hot buttons for you, because I think this gives leaders some idea about how this fits into that picture and ties those two things together.
Yeah, I just want to touch base on the employee engagement thing.
Yeah.
I had a conversation just last week. I was on the road in Boston, visiting some friends and speaking at a retreat, leadership retreat. And one of the things that we were talking about was, how do we get this atmosphere, this culture in the workplace where employees are engaged? And you mentioned the whole engagement. And I said, what does that mean to you? Because, everything is different for everybody. When I think about employee engagement, the conversation kind of consisted of this. Employee engagement for me, the number one thing that this person said was, gives me a sense of purpose. When I am engaged, I feel like I have a sense of purpose. Employees feel like their work is meaningful and impactful. And I say that, and I use that because when we go to some of these insights on DEI, Ben, when employees understand how their tasks contribute to the larger goals of the organization, they foster that deep connection to their job and their company. When they're not engaged, we see some of the things that we see on the screen here today that we're sharing from this research where, there's a disconnection for employees that they don't have that others do. So when I think about this in this first one, 30% employees are more likely to say that their managers, right, have never talked to them about their skills for future success at work. What are we preparing our employees? How are we communicating what's next for them, what's best for them? You mentioned earlier, we shared a data stat about those employees who will be leaving within the next 6 months. Why are people leaving their jobs? And I know there's this battle. I hate the tug of war of people don't leave, good jobs, they leave bad leadership. People don't leave bad leadership, they leave bad culture. And the reality is that if we're not being communicated to, it's hard to stay in no direction. Right. We talked about what are some of the most important things that we should have from a human skill standpoint. One of the ones that was repetitive after empathy was communication. Right. Most relationships, friendships, business ships, whatever ship you want to ride on does not end because of money. The number one reason why ships end is because of a lack of communication. And so when you think about that, 50% less likely to say that their leaders have discussed how their strengths align to their company's priorities. There's a disconnect there. Another thing you can think about is, how does my values connect? How does my values connect to the workplace values? How does my strengths align with the company's priorities? What are they asking for? What are we seeking as employees? I think we're seeking a connection, a sense of connection. And where there's not a sense of connection with leadership, we're trying to at least connect to something within the workplace. But if leadership is not connecting with us and communicating what we need and how our desired strengths can really connect to the future purposes, there's a huge disconnect there. Another one, Ben, that stuck out to me, that's in the gray area down there, is 2 out of 3 say that their skills that they need to be successful at work have changed since they took the job. If you rewind what I said earlier, when you don't check in with your employees, eventually your employees are going to check out. If we were all, by show of hand, and I'm interested now that I'm thinking about this, in the chat, if you can tell me if you've had your job for over 16 months. So if you're under 16 months or less, then hold tight. But if you've been at your company for 16 months or more, when was the last time your direct leader or manager reviewed your job description and responsibilities with you? Right? Are we doing this annually? How often are our jobs changing? How often are our responsibilities changing? We talked about adapting to change and how, before in HR, it took 3 to 5 years. There was something changing every 3 to 5 years. Now we're saying every 3 to 6 months, there's something new rolling out. There's a new update. There's a new strategy. There's a new process. There's a new law, right? There's always something adapting. if we're changing that much on the high end, what's changing on the day-to-day with our employees' skills? And what are we doing to prepare them? 2 out of 3 say that their skills need to be successful at work has changed since they took the job. But how much are we checking in with that change? Ben, for me, these are all crucial and important gaps that need to be filled. And I don't want to say, hey, let's get a ladder and get over it. I don't want to even build a bridge. I think fundamentally at the foundational stage, we have to start pouring the right foundation for not only just for us as a company, but for us as people to be able to get to where we want to go. And how do we do that? Remember the Titans, my favorite quote, attitude reflects leadership. What is the attitude of change? What is the attitude of our growth development? What is the attitude that we have as a business, and inspecting what we expect from our employees and what are we going to do about it, as far as making sure that we're not only expecting their skills to grow, but we're communicating how we're going to be a part of that journey as well.
Man, so I'm watching the chat here as you're talking, George, and we're getting a lot of like, oh yeah, it was shared with me when I started the job, but could be who knows how long ago. Some of these are like a couple of years ago, many years ago. So most of the people in the chat here, and we're in HR, we're the people who keep these things. We're the ones who know the job descriptions and the skills, and we know that better than anybody else. And we're even not seeing our own within this. So you hit a hot button there, I think, with that one, George.
Cool off.
Cool off. Well, I wrote the business ships thing too. You're like relationships, friendships, business ships. I don't know. It's a new Georgism potentially, but think about that aspect of it. All right. So good call outs there. Again, the big picture that I get from this set of stats here and others like this we've been sharing is all of us want to serve our people. This helps us know our people and what's bothering them, what's frustrating them, what's holding them back. And this lets us serve them at a deeper level. Ultimately, it's not to wag a finger. It's not to say you're wrong at this. You're not doing it right. All right, this is data from workers who could be at your organizations potentially if they respond to the survey. And so this is just saying now we know what we have to do, and we can go take action and make that happen. So we've shared some things on the less positive side, some areas to work on. I'll give you something encouraging here. I'll give you something positive, and George, you're welcome to chime in here too. I called it the Goldilocks effect because I needed something to make me smile. But when it's not too hot, not too cold, it's just right. When people are getting what they call the right types and amount of training at work, they're much more likely to say, I can change when I need to. I'm highly adaptable personally to the changes around me. They're also more likely to say, when they have more development, that their people around them, their other teammates, their manager is more likely to change as well. Those people that get that right amount of training are 3 times more likely to say that they can change, they can adapt to changing conditions at work because they have a sense of that. What's wild is we saw something like this a couple of years ago. We did a survey just after COVID, and we were looking at some of the data in there. One thing kind of stuck out at me, and I was trying to understand it and went a little deeper, and finally did some follow-up conversations with some of the people who responded, and my eyes were open. I was just amazed by this. So we saw in that data set this same question: did you get the right types and amount of training to do your work? If someone said yes to that, they're more likely to say their company, in the middle of the pandemic and everything that created, their company helped them adapt to all the things around them that were going on that were just unpredictable, unplanned, and completely unrelated to work. All these things happening in their personal life and in their family, and how they were going to handle all those things that we can ultimately remember. People said if they had the right training, it helped them with that. And the picture that I got there was, when we think about training, we asked about it earlier in the chat. People are like, oh yeah, we offer these courses, this content. That's where our mind goes immediately, because that's the thing we give out, we deliver. But the workforce sees it as, this gives me a sense of control over my life and the things around me, even in an unpredictable, unexpected scenario, that still gives them that sense of control in a powerful sort of way. All right. And then the last one here, when they have the right training, they have the right development, we are really pouring into them, they're much more likely, 5 times, to say that their company prioritizes, when they don't have that, sorry, goodness, I would say that backwards. When they don't get the training, they're more likely to say their company prioritizes business results over growth. And so the inverse is true. When they get the training, they're like, my company cares about me specifically, not just our team, not just our workforce as this big blob of people, but they care about Ben, they care about George, they care about where we're going and what we can do, what we can accomplish. And that excites me on a whole bunch of levels. George, anything else you want to tap into there before we moved over to do some giveaways, things like that?
Well, let's move over to the giveaways.
Let's have
I
some
will
fun.
say this: there's a chat. I do want to comment on this. I think it was, I'm not
Sure.
sure who said it, on the employee engagement side of things, a relationship. Basically it's a two-way road. I think it was
Mhm.
Jennifer. Maybe it's Jennifer. I meant to tag it. Sorry if it wasn't you, Jennifer. I'm sorry if it was you. I love this conversation when it comes to having comfortable and uncomfortable conversations in regards to communicating, not waiting for our leadership to be involved. I think for some employees, and I won't say all, some employees, George in particular, I'll put on this hat that says, if I don't trust or feel like my leader is communicating to me, why do I need to be the one that gives the effort? Right? You'll have those people who says, sure, we should speak up and defend ourselves, but some people don't feel comfortable in those situations. And sometimes there's a struggle, right? What's the outcome if I do stand up and want those kind of conversations? Does that need to happen? Yes. Should it happen? Yes. But I think, yes, it is a two-way street, but I think there's a road as well where employees don't feel connected in that sense of being there. But I love that comment because that is a good conversation to have, especially for employees to have amongst each other, but also for employees and leaderships to be able to have that, what I like to call culture of accountability. Like, we're going to hold each other accountable, right, to what we're expecting here as a team. And for me, when I had 18 retail stores, it wasn't what you said to me, it was how you said it. Like, I wanted you to be honest and real so that we can get to the end of where we wanted to be. Because at the end of the day, I wanted you to be as successful and more successful than I was as a leader. That was just my mindset. But not all leaders have that mentality. And if there's a fear of the unknown, that can cause people to not want to speak up. But we should, if you can, and you have that confidence and boldness.
It's a part. Listen, there's a reason that just anybody doesn't show up in learning or HR or talent. Like, it's not a job for everybody, because it's the work we have to do to help make these things happen. It's hard. It's tough. Right. And that's why George and I, celebrate every one of you when you show up, when you're here, when you're chiming in, not because we like all the comments we do, but because we know that you're filling up your tanks and you can go and support and serve other people. That's what excites us, because we know it's a tough job to do. I'm going to give a quick shout out or answer a question. I'll answer a bit and then I'll pass it to you, George, because you were chatting when it came in. But Faith asked a great question. I'll pop it up here on the screen so we have it. But what's the how? What do we do about this? So here's some of the data points. Here's the research. My gosh, what do we do about this? How do we make this happen if we don't have a bunch of resources? We don't have unlimited budgets, all those kind of things. How do we make this happen? A couple of things that I'll share off the top of my head. So the research shows that one of the best way people learn, the most common way they learn, isn't through all the courses and content and everything else. Those things do matter. Those things are helpful for building key skills, supporting a key direction the company's trying to go. If you don't have the ability or the time or the resources to build that, to get some of those courses and content is perfectly fine. But the most common way we learn is experientially. We learn hands-on. We learn by trying, by doing, by working at it, not doing it right, and doing it the next time and learning that. My twin 14-year-old daughters are in Spanish right now. I'm loving it because I love Spanish, and we're practicing at home, and it's been so much fun. And the words that I know in Spanish, I don't know all of them, but the words that I do know in Spanish, I screwed them all up the first time, and then I learned how to do them right. So giving experiences, using that as a way to teach people, to help them grow, that costs nothing typically to do that. There's a lot of different companies that have approached this. You may call it cross-training or whatever. There's a company years ago that I used to talk about when I present on employee growth mobility, because it was a great story of how they did this for virtually no cost. And the company's Hootsuite. So they're a software company. One of the things they do is you go on this tour of duty, if you will. And so let's say that George is kind of itching, like, I want to try something new, but I don't know what it is. And there's a spot on another team in the business. He can raise his hand and say, can I go over there? And what they do is they get the two managers, the lending manager and the borrowing manager, who's going to get George for the next few weeks. And one day a week, George goes over there, works on that team, contributes in that way, and brings back the learnings to his original team. So it's not a full-time piece. The other part is both of those managers are agreeing on the terms of that. So the manager who's lending you out is like, sure, George, you can go. But while we're covering your job for that one day a week, you're not here. Here's what we need you to bring back. Bring back why their processes are that way because we don't understand them, or how they make decisions along this front. Bring things back to us. And the manager that's borrowing George for that 1 day a week, that manager says, this is a vacation, get to work. Here's the things we need you to do. We need you to contribute this way. We need you to weigh in on this. Give us your input on this decision. And so they're getting a chance to try it out. After a few weeks is up, their tour of duty's done. They can go back to their primary role and say, okay, that was great. I'm going to move on. Or that was really cool. The next time something opens up there, I know I want to go in that direction because I've already sort of seen the inner workings. So that kind of thing requires some coordination, but it doesn't require money, budget, a lot of other things to make that happen. So that's an example. I can give you some more, Faith, if you want to ping me separately, or anybody that wants to. I'll share some stories like that companies that have solved this without needing an entire budget to fund that. And some of the ways to make that happen are pretty straightforward. And you're like, why didn't I think of that? It's okay. I had the same thought when some of those things pop up. George, anything else you'd add on that front around the what can they do? What can they do about this? Or if they don't have a big budget, any other thoughts on how we can be leaders and show them that the most out of it? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll say this, and I'll just apply because change has been a word that's thrown out a lot, Ben. One of the things that helped us create change and adapt to change, whether it's from the high end level or low end level, or embracing change within our employees. What I love in particular, and I teach this a lot with organizations, but the ACAR model by Jeff Hyatt is probably one of the best elements that you can use. I use it, and it's the 5 elements. ACAR, I probably love it because it's an acronym, right? But how do we create awareness? So A is the A is for awareness of the need for change. Like, we're going to make people aware of the change that's needed. In this regard, when it comes to skills and cross-skilling, upskilling, or just developing skills and human skills in general, driving that awareness is so crucial. My friend Shannon Love Rose is huge on this ACAR philosophy. And after you drive awareness, create awareness, then desire, creating that desire so that they're able to not just be pulled along, but want to participate and support the change. And have the desire to do so. Again, this is all built around that relationship, the two-way street of employee and leadership. K is for knowledge on how to change. This is how we're going to do it. So within the change, we're already, as we're embracing it, we're also teaching how to have the knowledge to do so, giving them practical steps and strategies. And there's a lot of simplicity in there. And here it is again. I'm like, give me more stuff. He's like, all right, how do we apply the ACAR, right? Driving that knowledge. The next A is for ability, and to implement the required skills and behaviors that is needed from us as a team is crucial. So what are the abilities? What abilities do we need? What is it that I can bring to the table? What strengths do I have that can be a part of this process for change? And being able to have that adaptability within the organization. What is the skills? What does it look like for us? As we're creating this process. And then the R is for reinforcement. To be able to sustain anything, you got to be able to reinforce those things. So awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement, the ACAR, and I can drop that in a link. You can Google it and have your eyes on that. But it's one of the best things that I believe you can use whenever you're dealing with change or any type of organizational change management. The ACAR model by far I speak it, I teach it, and the simplicity that it provides, not just for leadership, but the simplicity that it also provides for your employees is important. I think for me, Ben, when it comes to how do we start, where do we start? I think it's at the table, right? It's at the table with not just leadership, but also employees. Finding somebody on the front line to be a voice of the frontliners. Finding people in different departments that can be a part of, set information. Hey, this is what research is saying. We want to know how our people feel, right? Get their understanding, get their thoughts. And what do you want to do about it? How can we as a company provide? What does that look like? What we don't want, and as far as employees, if I put myself as an employee, what I never wanted was to always to have some continually coming down to me without me understanding the why and where it's coming from. Employees embrace change when they're a part of the conversation of change. And so I think that's important. Ben, I'll stop because I'll energize or bunny this conversation all day long. If you want to know more, just PM me and we can talk about this all day long. If you're in Indianapolis area, I moved back home and I'm all about some coffee and tea.
Goodness.
Tea talk with George.
Yeah, tea talk with George. There you go. Goodness. Okay. So we got just a few minutes left. Thank y'all for the good questions. Thank y'all for we love when we get the questions from y'all. I know there's lots of comments and things like that, but we try to flag the questions that are as we're going through because it's good for us to come back to, make sure we hit those. So if you ask it and we don't see it, feel free to drop that in again later on because we try to catch the comments that they're going, but sometimes it's hard to see everything that's coming through there. So thank you so much for all of you for joining us. I'm going to show off our, let's go back to my slides. So some giveaways here, a couple things. Take you a screenshot if your name is here. We're giving away copies of either the Talent Scarcity book, the last bestseller that I wrote, a lot in there around retention, recruiting, but there's some good stuff in there around development, some of the stories that I normally tell around how people grow, how they develop, how we can help them to move in the business, like the Hootsuite story and some of the others, they're in there. So if you like those case studies and examples, they're in the book. But if you already have one of those, if you've been one of our events before, I have 2 other books we've given away over the last year. It's more other ones. I still have a couple on the shelf back there. So the happiness track is one of those. And then anxiety at work, how to be more resilient in your daily work. So if your name's there, you can let me know which one of the books that you want, and I'll happily get you that. And then Nicole, you were we did our drawing for the comments on the LinkedIn post, and you were our winner for that one. So grab the link or grab the email address here, get your screenshot if you need to, shoot it over to me and the team, and we'll take care of you. Make sure you get all your goodies. And thank you all for joining us. So our last thing, always, we appreciate our sponsors, BetterWorks, Atana, Glider, Cornerstone. All of them came alongside us, helped make this event possible. We appreciate each and every one of them. And I appreciate George Rogers for being our new official certification credits whiz, for getting those credits taken care of, because that's one less thing on my plate. So I appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay. To everybody else out there, I hope you've gotten some good news. We're going to give you a few minutes back in your day, 5 minutes early here. So thank you all, as always, for joining us, for spending some of your valuable time with us. We don't take it lightly. We appreciate every bit of that. And we thank you for the good work that you're doing. We will catch you again next time, our next live stream. Watch for other notes. Watch for other emails coming from us. We have good stuff planned for 25. That's all I can sort of hint at right now. And I cannot wait for all of that. So, George, thank you again for joining me today. I appreciate you.
Take care, everybody. We love you.